Chapter 940. What do you want to do? Yili stared at him warily. Emo Shuyao pounced on Yili and kissed her happily. Since I've been seen, if I don't do anything, wouldn't I have let Feng San laugh for nothing? Emo Shuyao. Yili pretended to be angry and glared at him. Emo Shuyao was in a good mood and smiled at Yili. I want to do it in broad daylight. Yili's face turned red and she glared at him. Was it something to be proud of in broad daylight? Seeing Emo Shioyao's proud smile, Yili looked up gloomily and bit his lips. Emo Shioyao was stunned, and then he laughed loudly. He lowered his head to admire his wife's slightly tipsy and angry look. Li, you're so beautiful. Yili did not have time to react before her red lips were captured by certain someone's passionate lips. In an instant, the two of them fell into a passionate kiss. The battle between the Mahist army and the northern tribes continued, but the changes in internal energy were not known to outsiders. The messenger who had just arrived at the northern tribes' camp and tried to take over the army died a few days later because he could not acclimatize to the environment. By the time Yelu Hong's men arrived, they did not even have time to collect the corpse before it was burned to ashes by Yelu Yi. Yelu Hong's men were naturally enraged, but after seeing Yelu Ye's methods, they did not dare to go against him. They sent a secret letter back to the royal house of the northern tribes and reported it to the king of the northern tribes. The king of the northern tribes was naturally furious. Yelu Yi had led his troops to attack the Dachu state and occupied a large part of the Dachu state's territory. After his military exploits, he could be said to be the best among the princes and generals of the northern tribes. After that, he started to disobey orders. Then in Glass City, he caused the king of the northern tribes' beloved Qing Ina to die for no reason. After Yelu Hong returned, it was inevitable that he would add fuel to the fire, causing the king of the northern tribes to be even more worried about Yelu Yi. But even so, he did not think that Yelu Yi would have any ulterior motives. So when Yelu Yi asked for help, the king of the northern tribes did not hesitate to promote Helian Jun, whom he did not like much, and sent reinforcements. However, he did not expect that this time. He only sent someone to reprimand him, and the messenger died for no reason. The king of the northern tribes did not believe that it was because of a lack of acclimatization. The reason why the king of the northern tribes sent him to the Dachu state was because he had been to the Dachu state before. After the king of the northern tribes flew into a rage, he immediately ordered Yelu Yi to return to the northern tribes and hand over the military authority to the crown prince Yelu Hong. Upon receiving the king of the northern militants' decree, Yelu Hong was naturally overjoyed. Without another word, he packed his things and rushed towards the Dachu state. On the battlefield, the northern tribes' army and the Mahist army had been fighting for the past few days, and both sides had their fair share of victories and losses. However, the northern tribes' army's battle line was still slowly being pushed back. Today, the weather in the north was getting colder and colder. Within the northern tribes' territory, thousands of li were covered in ice and snow. Regardless of whether it was rations or soldiers, it was extremely difficult to replenish. Furthermore, the Dachu state that they occupied in the past few years had been ravaged and barren. There were no signs of human habitation. Thus, compared to the Mahist army who had an endless supply of rations, the northern tribe soldiers had a miserable winter. On this day, Mo Xiaobao excitedly rushed out of his tent and rushed into Mo Xiaoyao's tent like the wind. He proudly waved a few pieces of paper filled with words. Father, Mother, I've thought of it. At this time, it was almost the end of the year. Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li were discussing the next step with the generals. Although they seemed to have victory in their hands, the battle with Lei Jinting in the south was extremely difficult. Although there were a few old generals working together to stop Lei Jinting's advance, if they continued to drag things out, when Mo Jingli's army arrived, the situation in the south would immediately crumble. Seeing Mo Xiaobao rush in, the generals couldn't help but look at him curiously. Mo Xiaoyao raised his brows and took a look at the proposal written by Mo Xiaobao. Mo Xiaobao smiled proudly and said, How is it? Father, this child's idea is not bad, right? Mo Xiaoyao casually passed the document to Yi Li. After Yi Li looked at it, she smiled faintly at Mo Xiaobao and passed it to Yunting, who was already stretching his neck in joy. Seeing his mother smile at him, Imo Xiaobao's heart calmed down. Below, the generals whispered to each other as they looked at the document in Yunting's hand. They nodded their heads and praised. Using traps to trap the northern tribes' cavalry and iron caltrops, and cutting off the legs of the horses, luring the northern tribes' army into the mountains and surrounding them. Good idea. Did the Crown Prince really come up with this? It wasn't that these ideas were amazing. After all, a large portion of them were things that they had played with recently. Furthermore, some of them were common knowledge against cavalry. But Imo Xiaobao was different. He was only 7 or 8 years old and could think of so many things. He even understood the characteristics of the northern tribe's army and the terrain of the battle. This was not something an ordinary child could do. Everyone couldn't help but praise in their hearts. As expected of the Prince Ding Mansion's crown prince, he was really precocious. Imo Xiaobao stared at Imo Xiaoyao proudly, glaring at him as he admitted defeat. Imo Xiaoyao looked at him lazily and pointed at son Yaowu, asking, "Yaowu, do you think the Crown Prince's plan can be implemented?" Son Yaowu looked awkwardly at the expectant Crown Prince. He hesitated and said, The Crown Prince's plan is not bad. However, this terrain is at least 100 to 200 li away from where we are now. Now that we are in a flat land, the Crown Prince's plan to lure them into the mountains and annihilate them will be difficult." Imo Xiaobao was stunned. Looking at his father's smiling face, he stomped his feet and said unwillingly, "This is not fair. General Sun, you just need to tell me whether or not this prince's plan can be realized before then." Sun Yao thought for a moment and said sincerely, "Although there are still some small flaws, they can't obscure the jade. It should be possible." "Father." Imo Xiaobao turned his head proudly. Imo Xiaoyao looked at him with a smile and said gently and lovingly, "Xiaobao, there is something that I don't know if anyone has taught you, but I still have to tell you. There's a saying that speed is the most important thing in war. It has already been more than a month since you left. If you were to lead the army into battle, are you going to tell Yilu Yi that this crown prince has not thought of a plan and that we will fight again in a month?" Imo Xiaobao's proud little face fell, and he looked pitifully at Yili. Yili looked at him with a smile. Seeing his mother's expression, Imo Xiaobao knew that there was no hope for help. On the other hand, Imo Xiaobao also knew that Imo Xiaoyao was right. He thought that he was very smart. But if he really was to go into battle, why would the enemy give him a month to think of a plan? After hearing about the Mahist army situation in the past month, Imo Xiaobao's face darkened. He wasn't as smart as he thought. Chapter 9:41. Actually, Imo Xiaobao was being too harsh on himself. Given his age, to be able to finish reading the military book that Imo Xiaoyao gave him in a month's time, and even come up with a plan that a general like Sun Yao would evaluate based on the terrain and the strength of the two armies, he could already be proud of himself. However, Imo Xiaoyao and Yili did not console him. The heir of the Prince Ding Mansion was born with a different responsibility from normal children, so it was not wrong to give Imo Xiaobao some pressure at the appropriate time. Seeing him admit defeat, Imo Xiaoyao looked at him with a smile and said, "Then, isn't it time to fulfill your promise?" Imo Xiaobao's little face instantly darkened, and he stiffly turned his head to look at Yili. Yili smiled faintly and said, "Xiaobao, you must accept your loss. This time, just treat it as buying a lesson. You learn from your mistakes. In the future, don't casually make a bet with your father." Imo Xiaobao glared fiercely at Imo Xiaoyao, then angrily rushed out of the tent. Seeing him like this, everyone was curious about what kind of bet the little heir had made with the prince. They all bid farewell to Imo Xiaoyao and Yili, then slipped out of the tent to see the little heir fulfill his bet. Imo Xiaoyao did not make things difficult, waving his hand to let everyone leave. Imo Xiaobao stood in the middle of the camp with his hands behind his back in the most crowded spot. The soldiers coming and going did not see the little heir's small stature, delicate little face, and serious expression. They could not help but stop to see what the little heir was doing. Mo Xiaobao gritted his teeth and fiercely swept his eyes over the soldiers around him. Helplessly, he found that the people around him did not decrease because of his glare, but increased instead. He could only grit his teeth, close his eyes, and shout loudly. This air is called Mo Xiaobao. The soldiers present were all stunned. Someone burst out laughing, and the people around them also burst out laughing. A name like Xiaobao was actually very common, but it was usually given by illiterate people from ordinary families or nicknames given by ordinary families. Most of the time, it was done in private at home. Now, such an amiable and common name was given to the crown prince of the noble Prince-Ding mansion, but it was very funny. Looking at little Prince Mo's ink-colored brocade robes and his adorable appearance, she felt that this name was extremely fitting. Realizing that he was being mocked, Mo Xiaobao's face turned red. He stomped his feet and rushed back into the tent. She rushes into Yi Li's arms, feeling wronged. Niang Qin, all right, no one is laughing at you. Yi Li smiled and comforted her son's little head. Mo Xiaoyao, on the other hand, was smiling happily, not caring about his son's pride at all. Seeing this, Xiaobao gritted his teeth in hatred. In his heart, he silently complained about his grandfather. Why didn't he give his father a nickname back then? Niang Qin, father is bad. Father bullies Xiaobao. Mo Xiaobao said with tears in his eyes. Yi Li lowered her head and kissed his forehead, smiling. Who told you to make a bet with your father? Tell me, what were you thinking when you made a bet with your father? Mo Xiaobao lowered his head in silence. When father said that he would make a bet with him, he only thought about what would happen if he succeeded, but he didn't think carefully about whether he could succeed or not. Although this was a trap that father buried for him, if he didn't get carried away and become arrogant, perhaps he wouldn't be fooled. Niang Qin, Yi Li raised her eyebrows and said, you know you were wrong. And Mo Xiaobao repeatedly nodded, hiding in Yi Li's arms in shame, unwilling to get up. Yi Li pulled him up and smiled. Silly child, this is for your father. What's there to be shy about? You just need to remember this lesson. When your father was your age, he also thought about fighting with your grandfather and uncle all day long. Really? Mo Xiaobao's eyes lit up, looking at Mo Xiaoyao with shining eyes. Mo Xiaoyao gave a soft snort, looking at Mo Xiaobao with a teasing look, but I'm not that stupid. This heir will win one day. Mo Xiaobao gave a snort, his little face proudly raised. Mo Xiaoyao carelessly nodded and said, I will wait. Humph. Mo Xiaobao angrily snorted. This heir won't make you wait for too long. Just you wait. This prince will definitely make you announce your nickname in front of everyone. Whatever. As if he was angered by Mo Xiaoyao's attitude, Mo Xiaobao stomped his feet and rushed out of the tent like a gust of wind. Yi Li sighed helplessly as she watched Xiaobao leave in a huff. She smiled at Mo Xiaoyao and said, Are you happy now? Mo Xiaoyao smiled. Ollie, I'm doing this for Xiaobao's sake. Look at this kid. At such a young age, his eyes are already on top of his head. If we don't ruthlessly suppress him, in another 2 years, he won't even know his own name. Yi Li shrugged and said, You are his father. I don't care how you teach him, but if you're really stepped on by Mo Xiaobao in the future, don't expect me to lose face with you. Mo Xiaoyao reached out and pulled her into his embrace, saying with a smile, Husband and wife are one. If I really lose face, then we will also lose face. But if Mo Xiaobao wants to step on I'm afraid he still needs to train for a few more decades. And for Li Li's face, I will not lose face. Yi Li looked at him with a smile that was not a smile. I only know that there's a saying that the river flows east for 10 years, then west for 10 years. There's also a saying that the back waves of the Yangtze River push on the front waves, and the front waves die on the beach. Prince, be careful. Mo Xiaobao was quick-witted. Being a member of both the Su family and the Prince-Ding mansion, she felt that Mo Xiaobao would surpass Mo Xiaoyao in the future. I also heard a saying that the older the ginger, the spicier it is. Mo Xiaoyao said with a smile. Inside Mo Xiaobao's tent, Mo Xiaobao was lying on the table, working hard to write. The bodyguard accompanying him looked at the little heir's face, which was sometimes twisted and sometimes laughed foolishly, and couldn't help but think, "Little heir, what are you doing?" Mo Xiaobao laughed strangely and flicked the letter in his hand. "I want eldest uncle to send me some books. From today onwards, this heir will study hard." The bodyguard turned his head and looked outside the half-closed tent, nodding. "It is cold enough now." Chapter 942. In the blink of an eye, it was already the Dechu State's new year. Although they could not return home to reunite with their families, the Mahist army soldiers were still in high spirits as they prepared to slaughter chickens and goats to reward themselves. The entire Mahist army camp was more joyous than usual. In contrast to the joyous atmosphere of the Mahist army, the nearby royal house camp was gloomy and gloomy. Ever since the messenger sent by the king of the northern tribes was killed by Yi, there had been no news from the royal house of the northern tribes. After all, the royal house of the northern tribes was too far away from the Dechu state. However, Yi could clearly feel that the situation in the royal house of the northern tribes was extremely disadvantageous to him. Furthermore, the snow-covered plains made it impossible for the royal house of the northern tribes to transport their provisions to the Dechu state. In the previous few battles with the Mahist army seemed to have taken advantage of this weakness of the royal house of the northern tribes and specifically attacked their provisions. Although the royal house of the northern tribes would not run out of provisions in a short period of time, they were still very tight on provisions. Seeing the Mahist army soldiers celebrating and their laughter could be heard from the royal house of the northern tribes camp a few miles away, the comparison between the two made them feel even more disheartened and uneasy. In the royal house tent, Yi looked at the generals below and frowned. He asked in a low voice, "Now that the two armies are in a deadlock and our morale is low, what good ideas do the generals have?" Helian Jun stood up and said, "Your Highness, actually we don't need to be anxious." Yi raised his brows and asked, "What does General Helian mean?" Helian Jun smiled and said, "Because the Mahist army is more anxious than us. Jinim of Gojoseon of Xiling is currently attacking Ruichang and Wei City. Prince Ding is rushing back to help. Mo Jingli of the Dechu State's army will arrive soon. When that time comes, the Mahist army will be completely trapped. If your Highness is anxious now, you will fall into their trap." Yi asked solemnly, "Great General Helian, do you mean to drag it out?" Helian nodded and said, "That's right. As long as we wait for Manager Mo's troops to return to their positions, when the time comes, the three sides will attack together. Do you think we won't be able to deal with the Mahist army?" Yi sneered and said, "Does General Helian think we have that much time?" How could Yi not know what Helian Jun was talking about? Others could wait, but Yi couldn't. If the war dragged on, even if he won in the end, the royal house of the northern tribes would be completely controlled by Yelu Hong. At that time, he would only be making a wedding dress for someone else. As one of Yelu Ye's most trusted people, Helian Jun naturally knew about the royal court's news. The current situation was truly a dilemma. If they fought head-on, they would definitely not be able to win against the Mahist army. However, if they continued to drag on like this, the crown Prince Yelu Hong would gain the upper hand. His and the seventh prince's bitter battle would be in vain. In the end, they might not even be able to keep their lives. After Yi dismissed all the generals, leaving only Helian Jun and his son behind, Helian Jun asked in a low voice, "Your Highness, what do you mean?" Yi smiled bitterly. The Central Plains was vast and rich in resources. It was a place that the northern tribes had always coveted. Now that he had occupied this place, he naturally couldn't bear to give it up. However, was it worth it to give up the entire northern tribes for this place? If he could successfully conquer the entire Dechu state, then giving up the barren land of the northern tribes would naturally be worth it. However, the current situation in the Central Plains didn't seem to allow him to do so. More importantly, the soldiers under him were all born and raised in the northern tribes. Even if he broke off relations with the royal house of the northern tribes, these people might not be willing to leave their homes and stay in the Central Plains forever. On the other hand, if he retreated now and returned to the northern tribes, It could be said that the past few years of war would be completely wasted. All the military achievements of these few years would be reduced to nothing. Now that his imperial father was obviously dissatisfied with him, if he returned with his tail between his legs, it would obviously be disadvantageous to him. Yalui shook his head and smiled bitterly. What meaning does I have now? It's already too late to back down now. Emo Xiaoyao is really Ai's nemesis. If it wasn't for Emo Xiaoyao, he would have already occupied half of the Dechu state. Even if his imperial father was dissatisfied with him, he was strong enough to stand on his own. But now, ever since Emo Xiaoyao left, the northern tribe's army had suffered defeat after defeat. Their morale was low, and the hearts of the people in the camp were wavering. Many soldiers were starting to miss the northern tribe's plains. In fact, Emo Xiaoyao wasn't just Yelu Ye's nemesis. Emo Xiaoyao had only reappeared for 10 years. The originally strong Dechu state was in the south. The capital of Xiling was moved, and the imperial city was occupied. Ren Xining worked hard to build the northern tribes, but in less than 10 years, the country was destroyed. The reason why the royal house of the northern tribes wasn't affected by Emo Xiaoyao was because the royal house of the northern tribes was too far away from the central plains. Emo Xiaoyao didn't have the time or mood to stretch his hand so far. But now, in the conflict between Yelu Yi and Yelu Hong, Emo Xiaoyao's shadow could be seen. Helian Jun sighed and said, "The current situation is not good for us. I'm afraid your highness will have to make plans early." In fact, it was just one word, gamble. One bet was that the three allied armies could completely destroy the Prince Ding mansion, and that the northern tribes could occupy half of the Dechu state. At that time, even if Yelu Yi broke off relations with the royal house of the northern tribes, he could still maintain his own military. The second bet was that the northern tribes would retreat, and Yelu Yi would use the majority of the northern tribes' military power to fight with Yelu Hong. This was indeed a dilemma. At the side, Helian Peng said in a low voice, "Your Highness, Father, I'm afraid that even if we want to retreat now, the Mahist army may not allow it." The two of them looked at Helian Peng. Helian Peng said, "Your Highness and Father, have you forgotten that the northern tribes and the Prince Ding mansion have a deep hatred?" Hearing this, the two of them were shocked. In the war 10 years ago, not only did the Mahist army suffer, the northern tribes also suffered a great loss. But the Mahist army's hatred for the northern tribes would not be drowned out just because the northern tribes had also suffered a great loss. Emo Xiaoyao's group had always been swift and decisive. In 3 months, they had taken down the emperor of Xiling City, and in a month, they had taken over the Chu capital. But this time, they had not been in a rush against the northern tribes. This was completely different from his usual style. Thinking of this, Helian Jun's heart sank. His expression changed, and he said, "Emo Xiaoyao wants to wipe out the northern tribes in one fell swoop." Hearing this, Yelu Yi was also shocked. He said in a low voice, "Emo Xiaoyao's appetite is too big." Helian Jun said, "Emo Xiaoyao was only 10 years old, and he had already mastered the art of war. His tactics were unfathomable. After 10 years of hiding his strength, I'm afraid that it is not simple. Your Highness, pay attention to the 2 wings of our army. If Emo Xiaoyao really wants to wipe us out, he will definitely send troops to surround us from the 2 wings. He will also block our retreat." Yelu Yi knew that he was not as good as Helian Jun in terms of military strategy. He nodded and said, "I understand. Thank you for the reminder. But now, it is difficult to advance, and we cannot retreat. What do the 2 of you think we should do?" Helian Peng said, "I think that since we cannot retreat, we should bravely advance. Furthermore, with the climate of the northern tribes, even if we retreat safely, the royal house of the northern tribes will need 2 to 3 months before the ice on the grasslands will melt. Since that is the case, why not take a gamble? King Ding's residents and the northern tribes have already become mortal enemies. If we break the agreement halfway, I'm afraid that the Western Hill will not let the northern tribes rest." Although the Western Hill was no longer connected to the northern tribes, the Western Hill was still a powerful country. Furthermore, The northern tribes were severely lacking in resources. Many of them had to be purchased from the Western Hill. If they offended two powerful enemies at the same time, the northern tribes would be in a dire situation. Chapter 943. Yuli sighed and said, "Fine, General Helion and Uncle. What suggestions do you have?" Helion Jun pondered for a moment and said, "Tomorrow is the Dachu State's New Year. At that time, the entire Mahist army will celebrate. At that time, the Mahist army's guard will be at its lowest. Our army can take the opportunity to launch a sneak attack. Will that work?" Yilu Yi was hesitant. Mo Xiaoyao was one of the top generals in the world. Would he really make such a mistake? Helion Jun said, "Strike first and gain the upper hand. Our army's patience will only cause the Mahist army to retreat step by step. It will cause our army's morale to plummet." Yili pondered for a moment and sighed. "Let's do as Uncle says." In the Mo family army camp, the night was brightly lit and the sounds of laughter were unceasing. Even the ban on alcohol that was strictly forbidden during the march was temporarily lifted. The entire military camp was filled with the strong aroma of alcohol. Dozens of soldiers were gathered around the bonfire, drinking wine and eating meat, having a great time. Mo Xiaoyao and Yili also appeared in the camp with the other generals to drink with the soldiers. Although the winter was bitterly cold, the entire camp was lit with flames. The soldiers drank strong alcohol and did not feel the chill of winter at all. Even Mo Xiaobao sat beside Mo Xiaoyao and Yili. His delicate little face was filled with joy. In the dark night, a group of northern tribe soldiers quietly approached the Mahist army's camp. They could hear the cheers and noise from the Mahist army's camp from 3 to 4 li away. Also, the light from the bonfire lit up half the sky. This made the northern tribe soldiers who were ordered to launch a sneak attack feel even colder. They could not help but feel a strong sense of envy towards the Mahist army. What good fortune! We are starving and freezing here, but they are drinking and eating. A northern tribe's soldier shivered and complained in a low voice. The person beside him nodded in agreement. "Isn't that so? The Mahist army is indeed much richer than us. It's rare for us to eat meat now. I heard that they still eat meat every day." Now that the road from the northern tribes to the Dachu state was blocked, the military supplies could not be transported over. Ever since the Mahist army started fighting with the northern tribes, many of the civilians who were originally under the control of the northern tribes ran over to the Mahist army. They could not even snatch anything from them. As a result, the rations in the army were severely reduced. Although there were many horses to the northern tribes, the most important thing was the horses. Therefore, unless it was absolutely necessary, it was absolutely not to be used to kill soldiers. Hence, these northern tribe soldiers who were used to eating meat and drinking wine could only learn from the people of the Central Plains and eat coarse grain to fill their stomachs. Once we take down the Mahist army camp, those things will naturally belong to us. Another northern tribe soldier said expectantly, "That's right. If we snatch the rations of the Mahist army, we should also celebrate." The rest agreed. They were looking forward to snatching the rations of the Mahist army. The northern tribe soldiers who were preparing to launch a sneak attack waited for 2 to 4 hours outside the Mahist army camp. Only then did they see the lights of the Mahist army camp gradually dim. The noise from before also became much quieter. They knew that the Mahist army had finished celebrating and were preparing to rest. They had waited for half a night, waiting for the Mahist army to be drunk and tired before they could strike. Helion Peng, who was leading the troops, saw that the time had come. He softly ordered his subordinates to pass down the order. The northern tribe soldiers who were originally hiding in the snow immediately moved out and rushed towards the Mahist army camp. As they neared the Mahist army camp, Helion Peng saw that the Mahist army camp was already silent in the darkness and could not help but stop. The general beside him did not understand and softly asked, "General," Helion Peng said in a deep voice, "Something is wrong." No matter how weak the Mo family army was, they shouldn't have been able to walk so close without any signs of movement. No matter how one looked at it, this was a trap. Hearing Helion Peng's words, everyone could not help but become nervous and vigilant. "General," are you saying? Helian Peng had a bad feeling in his heart and decisively said, retreat. However, it was easy to think about it, but it was not so easy to leave. In the darkness, the surroundings suddenly lit up and a loud laugh came from not far away. General Helian, since you are already here, why are you in such a hurry to leave? The neat formation of the Mahist army suddenly rushed out from the shadows and surrounded the northern tribe's troops. A young general around the age of 27 or 28 rode out on his horse and looked at Helian Peng with a smile. It's New Year's Eve. General Helian, are you here to give me a New Year's greeting? Yunting. After these few days of fighting, Helian Peng naturally had a good understanding of the Mahist army's generals. He was also familiar with Yun Ting, the young general that Princess Ding had high hopes for. Yun Ting smiled proudly and said, yes, it is me. General Helian, have you been well these few days? Helian Peng lowered his eyes and frowned slightly. Suddenly, his heart trembled and he raised his head and said, you are the only one in the camp? The northern tribe's sneak attack was such a big matter, but only Yun Ting came out of the Mahist army. If it was not because the people from the Prince Ding mansion looked down on the northern tribes, then there was no one else in the Mahist army camp. Yun Ting was the only general here. Yun Ting did not try to hide it, smiling with some surprise as he said, General Helian is indeed very perceptive. What he meant was that he was admitting that he, Yun Ting, was the only person in charge of the Mo family army's camp. However, Yun Ting's admission did not make Helian Peng happy. Instead, it made him even more restless. If there was only Yun Ting, Helian Peng might not be unable to take down the Mahist army camp. However, if it was just an empty camp, what was the use of taking it down? More importantly, where did Mo Xiaoyao and Yili bring the other generals? Compared to Helian Peng's gloomy and uncertain mood, Yun Ting was full of satisfaction. It was as if he was not worried about his mere few thousand men being surrounded by Helian Peng's army. He smiled and said, General Helian, do you want to know the whereabouts of the prince and princess? Helian Peng said in a low voice, General Yun, please tell me. Didn't General Helian already guess? The prince and princess went to sneak attack the northern tribe's camp. Yun Ting laughed and said, General Helian, do you think only the northern tribes know how to sneak attack? When it comes to the art of war, the people of the Central Plains are the ancestors. Helian Peng's face instantly turned green. Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li had brought almost all the generals under the Mahist army to sneak attack the northern tribe's camp. It was obvious that they were determined to succeed. He turned around and shouted, retreat, return to camp immediately. Yun Ting laughed coldly. Do you think the Mahist army camp is a place where you can come and go as you please? With a wave of his hand, the Mahist army had already blocked the path of the northern tribe's army. The location of the Mahist army's camp was very strange. If the northern tribe's army wanted to return, there was only one shortcut. However, that shortcut was blocked by the Mahist army that was lying in ambush. The other paths were not only difficult and treacherous, but they also had to take many detours. If Helian Peng wanted to return to reinforce the northern tribe's camp, he could only charge past Yunting. Chapter 944. However, Yunting joined the army when he was young. He followed Murong Shun, Zhang Qilan, Lu Jingxian, and the others from an ordinary soldier to a young general who could lead an army by himself. For more than 10 years, he had participated in no less than 100 battles. How could it be so easy for Helian Peng to be favored? Yunting sat high on the horse and looked at Helian Peng with a smile. He said, General Helian, don't be anxious. Let's exchange pointers first. You're courting death. Helian Peng was very confident in his martial arts. Even in the martial arts world of the Central Plains, there were few opponents, let alone a young general like Yunting. He raised the long saber in his hand and pounced on Yunting. When the two generals moved, the soldiers under them naturally did not hold back. They quickly tangled with each other in the midst of battle cries. Yunting grinned at Helian Peng, but did not fight him head-on. When he saw Helian Peng coming to kill him, he immediately pulled his horse and ran to the other side. Helian Peng caught up with Yun Ting in a few leaps. Where do you think you're going? Yun Ting turned around and smiled at him. I know that General Huiyan's martial arts are excellent, so I specially invited a few masters to exchange pointers with you. As he spoke, a few black shadows appeared from the depths of the darkness. Helian Peng glanced at the dark patterns on the man in black's lapel and said in a deep voice, Qilin. Yes. The leading man in black laughed in a low voice and raised his head. It was the third young master of the Su family, Su Qingfeng. Yin Ting got rid of Helian Peng and immediately cupped his hands to Su Qingfeng. He said with a smile, Commander Su, I'll have to trouble you to take care of General Helian. After that, he lifted the reins and rushed into the battlefield again. Helian Peng's face was very ugly at this time. These days, Qi Lin of the Mahist army and his Yazi subordinates were also fighting openly and secretly. They had fought more than 10 times. However, Qi Lin rarely lost. On the contrary, the Yazi that he had high hopes for had almost been wiped out after a few months of fighting. Helian Peng also understood the difference between Qi Lin and Yazi. At the same time, he hated Princess Ding even more for training Qi Lin. At this moment, the people surrounding him were no match for him in a one-on-one fight. However, a swarm of them would also cause him to be flustered. Needless to say, these people didn't even need to kill him. They only needed to trap him for a few hours, and he wouldn't be able to go back to rescue them. Third Master Su? Helian Peng stared at Su Qingfeng and said, I didn't expect that the Su family's scholarly family would produce a military general like Third Young Master. Su Qingfeng did not mind his mockery. With a leisurely laugh, he said, learning literature and martial arts is voluntary. Our Su family has never been demanding. Even if I throw away my pen and join the army, I won't disgrace the Su family's martyrs. Although Su Qingfeng liked martial arts, he grew up in the Su family. He had been influenced by poetry since he was young. Although his talent was not as good as the Su family's, he was much better than the average person. Moreover, Su Qingfeng had never regretted his choice, nor did he think that he had made a mistake. Helian Peng's words were not even qualified to scratch his itch. Helian Peng also knew that this situation was more or less useless. It was better to get rid of Qi Lin's siege as soon as possible and lead the troops back to rescue them. With a serious expression, he said in a deep voice, then, this general would like to experience Qi Lin's skills. Su Qingfeng and the others did not say much. They directly took out their weapons and went up to fight. The strength of Qi Lin and the others was their teamwork. Although they were not as strong individually, with a few people surrounding them, Helian Peng could only be suppressed. On the other side, Yun Ting led his soldiers and rampaged through the chaotic army. Many northern tribe soldiers who did not have time to react were killed. The mountains were filled with murderous cries. At this time, Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao had already appeared not far from the northern tribe's camp. Looking at the brightly lit northern tribe's camp, Mo Xiuyao's lips curled into a cold smile. It was obvious that Yilu Yi and the others were still waiting for news from Helian Peng. What Yilu Yi didn't expect was that the person they wanted to ambush had already appeared in front of them with a group of people. Yi Li urged her horse to stand beside Mo Xiuyao and looked at the camp with him. She smiled faintly and said, Helian Peng must have already started fighting with Yun Ting. As long as Helian Peng and Yun Ting started fighting, it would be impossible for them to retreat for a while. They would also have enough time to deal with Yilu Yi and Helian Zhen. Mo Xiuyao nodded and said, That's right. I wonder if Helian Zhen will think that I'm outside his camp right now? On the other side, Feng Jiao smiled and said, Helian Zhen must think that Prince was really shocked by Helian Peng's sudden attack. Originally, the Mahist army celebration was just a trap for the northern tribes. With Mo Xiuyao's personality, how could he be so conceited that the entire army would celebrate when he had yet to achieve complete victory? It was a pity that Helian Zhen did not understand Mo Xiuyao's character at all. Are you ready? Mo Xiuyao asked calmly. Feng Jiao nodded and said, Yes, Sun Yao will lead the troops to the left, and Chunyan will lead the troops to the right. Zhouman has already led the troops to Huifeng Valley. We will attack from the front. After 2 hours, Yinting will let Helian ping out to meet with Yelu Yi and the others. I guarantee that not a single northern tribe soldier will escape. Mo Xiao nodded and praised. Very good. I want to see if Helian Jun still has the power to turn the situation around. Although he was smiling, Mo Xiaoyao's words were filled with a cold, killing intent. Prince, should we attack now? Feng Jiao was also eager to give a try. Let's do it. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said. Feng Jiao smiled and took out an arrow from his back. He knocked it and pulled the bowstring. A long arrow with a fiery glow shot towards the northern tribe's camp. Chapter 945. In the northern tribe's main tent, Yelu Yi and Helian Jun were sitting inside. Helian Jun's expression was solemn, and he was silent. Yelu Yi was pacing back and forth in the main tent. His sharp brows were tightly knitted together. His face was also vaguely anxious and uneasy. After pacing back and forth for a long time, Yelu Yi squatted down and looked at Helian Jun. Uncle, will there be any problems with General Helian? Helian Jun calmed himself down and said in a low voice, Your Highness, please be patient. Peng did not send any bad news. We must not panic. Yelu Yi nodded and was silent for a long time before he said, I don't know why, but I feel uneasy. Helian Jun was silent. He did not know if he was too worried or if something had really happened. Yelu Yi was not the only one who felt uneasy. Even Helian Jun felt that something was wrong. After thinking for a while, Helian Jun stood up and said, I will send people to investigate. Yelu Yi nodded and said, Uncle, send more people. No matter what news there is, let them report back as soon as possible. Yes, Helian Jun replied and turned to leave the tent. The moment Helian Jun walked out of the tent, he saw a flame shoot in from outside the tent and landed in the northern tribe camp. It landed on one of the tents. Even though it was winter and many of the tents were covered with a layer of frost and did not burn immediately, it still shocked many people. Helian Jun was stunned for a moment before he reacted and shouted, Enemy attack! Yelu Yi, who was originally in the tent, heard his voice and immediately rushed out. He said in a low voice, What's going on? Helian Jun's eyes were slightly red. He said, The Maist army is outside the camp. Defend. That fire arrow had caused an uproar in the northern tribe's camp. After a while, the low sound of a bugle horn could be heard in the camp. All the soldiers immediately picked up their weapons and rushed out of their tents to defend. Unfortunately, as soon as the soldiers at the front appeared outside the gate, they were greeted with a rain of arrows that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. In the darkness, the enemy was in the dark while they were in the light. They could only see clearly when the arrows were right in front of them. It's a Maist army, someone shouted. The entire northern tribe's encampment was thrown into chaos. Helian Jun's anger flared up. He loudly ordered the generals to lead the soldiers to defend against the enemy. Not far from the northern tribe's camp, Mo Xiaoyao and Yili were riding on horseback. Behind them were Feng Jiao, Zhuit Jing, Lin Han, and the rest. Seeing that the Maist army had caught the northern tribe's army off guard, everyone was in a good mood. Xiao Bao sat in front of Mo Xiaoyao, covered by the large battle robe, only revealing his small head. A pair of bright eyes stared at the northern tribe's camp, which was filled with cries of slaughter. It was obvious that she was watching with great interest. After these few days of losses, the northern tribe's army's numbers were almost the same as the Maist army's. Now that most of the northern tribe's troops had been taken away by Helian Peng, the northern tribe's troops were even lesser than the Maist army. Under the sudden attack, the northern tribe's army was defeated even more quickly. In less than an hour, the entire situation started to favor the Maist army. Helian Jun brought his soldiers to support Yelu Yi. As they retreated, he turned back and said to Yelu Yi, Your Highness, we have been fooled. Peng might not be able to make it back in time. Let's retreat first. Retreat. Where else can we retreat to? Yelu Yi led the way. He was not saying it out of anger. They were now less than 200 miles away from the northern tribe's border. If they retreated any further, they would really have to retreat back into the northern tribe's territory. It also indicated that the war against Great Chu, which had lasted for 2 to 3 years and started with great vigor, would end in the most humiliating ending. Yelu Yi was naturally unwilling, but the current situation did not allow him to be unwilling. They could either retreat or fight to the death and wait for Hellion Peng's return. But regardless of whether Hellion Peng could return, the price of fighting to the death was not something Yelu Yi was willing to bear. He glared fiercely in the direction of the Mahist army commander and said hatefully, "Retreat." The bugle horn for retreat sounded in the dark night. The already low morale of the northern tribe's soldiers immediately retreated in the direction Yelu Yi had left in. Although the Mahist army soldiers were chasing behind, they did not close in on them. They only maintained a steady pace. Hellion Jun felt that something was wrong, but the current situation only gave him two options. He could either move forward or turn back. They naturally could not turn back and fight the Mahist army head-on. They could only move forward. On the other side, Hellion Peng, who was surrounded by the Qi Lin, finally managed to escape after 2 hours. When he finally managed to break through the encirclement of Yun Ting's army, the eastern sky was already turning bright. Behind him, Yun Ting and the rest looked in the direction of the northern tribe's army and smiled faintly. One of the Qi Lin said sullenly, "Why didn't we kill him? Why did we let him go?" Although Hellion Peng's martial arts were indeed very powerful, it was not the most powerful for the well-trained Qilin, who already had many experiences in fighting against experts. It was only a matter of time before they took his life. Su Qingfeng patted his subordinate's head and said, "Since the prince has given the order, he naturally has his reasons. Let's go, we can't miss the show." Everyone agreed in unison. After packing up, they chased after Hellion Peng's army. By the time Hellion Peng met up with Yelu Yi and the rest, the sky was already bright. Although they could not see clearly due to the thick fog in the morning and almost killed each other, they still managed to meet up. It was not safe to stay in such an unfamiliar foggy environment. However, the northern tribe soldiers were exhausted after fighting for half a night. Hellion Jun had no choice but to find an open area to rest for a while. After counting the number of soldiers, the three of them turned pale. There were originally a few 100,000 soldiers left, but after a night of fighting, there were less than 200,000 left. At least 90% of the soldiers were brought back by Hellion Peng. The soldiers that were left behind to guard the camp were almost completely wiped out. Hellion Jun looked gloomily at Yelu Yi, who was sitting at the side in a daze. He looked at Hellion Peng and said, "Penger, how did you find us?" Hellion Peng frowned and said in a low voice, "After I killed my way out of Yun Ting's army, I found 4 to 5 groups of Mahist army to intercept me. I fought my way here and coincidentally met Father and Your Highness." Hellion Jun frowned and said in a low voice, "This is not right. We were running in front and the Mahist army was chasing us from behind. Even if we lost our way, we couldn't have gone too far. How did you coincidentally meet us while being chased?" Hellion Peng's heart skipped a beat, and he suddenly jumped up and said, "Father." Hellion Jun looked at him, and Hellion Peng's expression was gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said, "We fell into Mo Xiaoyao's trap." Hellion Jun was stunned, and his expression changed. He grabbed Hellion Peng and said quickly, "You mean—" Chapter 946. Haha, General Hellion, don't you think it's too late for you to understand now? In the thick fog, a joyful and low voice sounded from afar. When the voice first sounded, it was clearly very far away. However, when the voice was about to fade away, it seemed to be right in front of them. Hellion Jun and the rest looked towards the source of the voice. Not far away, where the thick fog had dispersed, a white-robed and white-haired figure appeared abruptly. The expression on his face could not be seen clearly due to the faint fog, but Hellion Peng and Hellion Jun could clearly feel that he was smiling, and it was an extremely cold smile. "Mo Xiaoyao." Hellion Jun gritted his teeth and said, "That's I. After 19 years, it's not easy to invite General Hellion back to Wind Valley." Mo Xiaoyao was dressed in white, his white hair fluttering in the cold wind. His lips curled into a faint smile, but the words that came out of his mouth inexplicably made people feel a kind of chilling, murderous intent. "This is Wind Valley. Helian Jun exclaimed in shock. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, "Isn't it? I didn't expect General Helian to have forgotten about it in less than 20 years. However, I also feel that Ghost Valley must have left a deep impression on General Helian. It's a pity that I can't invite General Helian back to Ghost Valley this time." Wind Valley was the place where the Mahist army was buried by Helian Jun. Even the Prince Ding mansion's former Prince Ding, Mo Xiuan, had died not far from here. Ghost Valley was less than 50 li away from Wind Valley. It was the place where Mo Xiaoyao had defeated Helian Jun with a fire, and where Mo Xiaoyao himself had been severely injured. These two places were unforgettable to both parties who had participated in the war. As Mo Xiaoyao spoke, countless Mahist army had already surrounded them from all directions. In the fog, one could vaguely see countless black shadows moving about. It was as cold and ethereal as the netherworld, causing the tired and hungry northern tribe soldiers to be even more frightened. Behind Mo Xiaoyao, a few figures gradually appeared. Yili, Yin Ting, and the rest in white, young Master Feng San in red, and Su Qingfeng, Zhu Jing, Lin Han, and the rest in black. They were all eyeing the northern tribe's soldiers below. Only Mo Xiaobao, who was wearing a black brocade robe and standing beside Yili, seemed to be in high spirits even though he hadn't slept the entire night. She opened her big round eyes and looked curiously at the people below. Looking at the serious faces of the people around her, she curiously tugged at Feng Jiao's clothes. Feng Jiao quietly shook his head at Mo Xiaoyao and gave Mo Xiaoyao a look. Mo Xiaobao pursed his lips and quietly moved to Mo Xiaoyao's side. "Lord Father." Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and bent down to carry Mo Xiaobao. He smiled and said, "Yu Chun, do you know where this place is?" This was the first time Mo Xiaoyao called his name so seriously. Mo Xiaobao blinked and asked curiously, "Lord Father, where is this place?" "This is the place where the martyrs of the Mahist army and your uncle were buried," Mo Xiaoyao said in a low voice. Mo Xiaobao blinked. Although he was young, he was naturally taught the history of the Mahist army and the Prince Ding mansion. Naturally, he also knew that he had an uncle whom Lord Father respected very much who was killed by the northern tribes. In the past, Mo Xiaobao secretly thought that if his uncle didn't die, would there be one more person to help him when Lord Father bullied him? "Lord Father, are we going to take revenge for Uncle?" Mo Xiaobao asked with wide eyes. "That's right," Mo Xiaoyao said in a low voice. Feng Jiao and the rest who were following behind Mo Xiaoyao couldn't help but glance at Yili. The little prince wasn't even 8 years old yet. Wasn't it a little too perverted to let a child like him watch such a scene? Yili sighed helplessly. Looking at Mo Xiaobao's excited appearance, it didn't seem like he was afraid at all. Yili was also worried that her obedient son would be taught astray by Mo Xiaoyao. But no matter how close Mo Xiaobao was to Yili, boys were naturally more obedient to their father in certain aspects. For example, right now, Yiluyi stepped out from the northern tribe's army, his face ashen as he stared at Mo Xiaoyao and said in a low voice, "Prince Ding, good strategy, good patience." At this point, how could Yiluyi not know that Mo Xiaoyao had been toying with him all this time? His ultimate goal was to force the northern tribe's army to return Wind Valley, to take revenge on Mo Xiuan for being plotted against. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and nodded. "Well said. Even if Seventh Highness brings a group of defeated soldiers back to the northern tribes, you will definitely not be Yellow Crown Prince's match. You might as well die and return Wind Valley and preserve Seventh Highness' reputation." Seventh Highness should be thanking I. Yilu Ye's expression twisted. Even ants wanted to live. What more humans? Yilu Yi wasn't afraid of death, but he definitely wasn't willing to die like this. But he also understood that their current situation wasn't up to him to decide. With hundreds of thousands of Mahist army surrounding them, they had less than 200,000 soldiers. Even if they gave it their all, they wouldn't be able to escape. As long as Mo Xiaoyao gave the order, tens of thousands of arrows would shoot, and the northern tribe's army would be buried in an instant. Helian Jun's face was pale as he remained silent. Helian Peng stood beside Yiluyi, his gaze like an arrow as he stared at Yi Li, who was beside Mo Xiaoyao. I am Helian Peng. Please battle with Princess Ding. Helian Peng suddenly took a step forward and said in a low voice. The Maoist army generals all looked at Helian Peng as if they were looking at an idiot. Wanting to challenge Princess Ding in front of Prince Ding, this guy must be crazy. As expected, Mo Xiaoyao laughed coldly and said indifferently, General Helian, why don't you challenge I? Are you looking down on I? Helian Peng glanced at Mo Xiaoyao, but didn't reply, only staring at Yi Li. Yi Li smiled faintly and took a step forward. Since General Helian is interested, this consort will naturally accompany you. Please. Although Yi Li didn't have a good impression of Helian Peng was a general of a country and naturally knew that challenging a female in front of so many people wasn't something to be proud of. Knowing that he was going to die, he still persisted. At least this proved that Helian Peng really saw Yi Li as an opponent. Princess Li, Mo Xiaoyao frowned slightly. Yi Li's internal energy was much weaker than Helian Peng's. Although he was confident that Yi Li's life wouldn't be in danger with him around, he couldn't guarantee that Yi Li wouldn't be injured. Yi Li shook her head and smiled. It'll be fine. Yi Li took a few steps forward and a silver light flashed in her sleeve. A short blade, glittering with cold light, appeared in Yi Li's hand. On the opposite side, Helian Peng held a long blade in his hand. Just looking at the weapons made people feel that the two of them weren't on equal footing. Helian Peng didn't hold back and slashed the long blade in his hand towards Yi Li. Yi Li stepped sideways and dodged the blade. Bai Sei's voice was like a swan as it flew towards Helian Peng. In the faint fog, the crowd could only see two silhouettes coming and going. The sound of weapons clashing could be heard continuously. Yi Li, who was fighting with Helian Peng, frowned slightly. In terms of strength and internal energy, she was definitely no match for Helian Peng. Just now, the short blade and the long blade clashed several times. Yi Li's right hand felt numb from the vibrations. She didn't want to fight with Helian Peng head-on anymore. She quickly closed in on Helian Peng and fought in close combat. As a result, Helian Peng's long blade was useless. He tried to distance himself from Yi Li a few times, but failed. In terms of close combat, there weren't many people in the world who were Yi Li's match. If she didn't use her internal energy, even Mo Xiaoyao might not be able to gain much of an advantage. As a result, the two of them were evenly matched. Chapter 9:47. The two of them fought for close to 100 moves, but neither of them gained the upper hand. Helian Peng's expression darkened. His powerful internal energy gathered in his palm as he sent a palm strike towards Yi Li. Yi Li reacted even faster. She drew a sharp blade from her left sleeve and stabbed it towards Helian Peng's abdomen without hesitation. At the same time, she leaned to the side to avoid Helian Peng's palm strike. Helian Peng wholeheartedly wanted to heavily injure Yi Li. He actually ignored Yi Li's approaching dagger. At the same time that his abdomen hurt, his palm strike also landed on Yi Li's body. Even though Yi Li leaned to the side to avoid it, she still received a trace of internal injury. She turned around to withdraw her dagger and quickly retreated. When Yi Li pulled out her dagger, Helian Peng realized that something was wrong. Yi Li's dagger was specially made to be used as a military knife. There was a blood groove in the middle. As long as it touched the body, it would bleed incessantly. Last time, Helian Peng injured his arm and took a long time to recover. This time, his abdomen was even more so. However, Helian Peng knew that this time, if he fell into Mo Xiaoyao's hands, there was no chance of survival. As long as he could kill or heavily injure Yi Li, why would he care if he bled to death? Yi Li retreated to a distance and stood still. A trace of dark red blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. Helian Peng stood still with his long blade propped up. Blood flowed from his abdomen. Yi Li casually wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and said indifferently, General Helian, thank you for letting me win. Helian Peng sneered. He actually threw away his long blade and pounced towards Yi Li. Yi Li's eyes flashed. The short blade in her right hand flashed with a cold light. Like a white rainbow, it swept past Hellion Peng's side. The two people only crossed paths for a moment before they separated again. Yili turned around. On the other side, Hellion Peng had already silently collapsed. A thin line of blood slowly blossomed on his throat. "Penger!" Hellion Zhen screamed. Even though Hellion Peng was only his adopted son, he had raised him from a young age. What's more, Hellion Zhen himself didn't have any children, so Hellion Peng was no different from his own son. In this world, other than Yilu Yi, Hellion Zhen valued Hellion Peng the most. Seeing him die at the hands of Yili, she was naturally filled with grief. She threw herself onto Hellion Peng's body and cried bitterly. She raised her head and glared fiercely at Yili. Yili wiped the blood off the dagger and walked back to Emo Xiaoyao's side. Emo Xiaoyao was relieved to see that her injuries were not serious. The moment they met, the Northern Tribe's army lost their most skilled fighter, Hellion Peng. This made the already low morale of the Northern Tribe's army even worse. Feng Jiao waved the black flag in his hand, and the Mahist army began to retaliate. However, there was a slight opening in the northwest direction for the remaining Northern Tribe soldiers to pass through. Emo Xiaoyao and the rest did not chase after them. Instead, they stood there calmly and looked in the direction of the Northern Tribe soldiers. Boom! With a loud explosion, a red light shot into the sky from the northwest direction. In an instant, almost half the sky was dyed red. Faint cries of agony could be heard from the northwest direction. It was almost unbearable to hear. Yili stood silently beside Emo Xiaoyao. In the end, she could not help but close her eyes and cover Emo Xiaobao's ears. However, Emo Xiaobao refused to be obedient and grabbed Yili's hand. Although the cries of agony were terrifying to him, he knew that his father was taking revenge for the dead Mahist army and his uncle. Children were always naive and cruel. In their eyes, there was only right and wrong. Since it was right, there was no need to be afraid or even pity. Feng Jiao silently looked at the red light shooting into the sky. He had also participated in the battle more than 10 years ago. Although he did not make it to Huifeng Valley, when he and Emo Xiaoyao arrived, they still saw the tragic state of the soldiers who died there. No, they did not even die in battle. They died in vain. Just like Emo Xiaoyao, Feng Jiao had never forgotten in the past 19 years. Just like how the souls of the Mahist army had never been able to rest in peace. Until now, the 200,000 soldiers of the Northern Tribes were sacrificing the souls of the Mahist army. May the ancestors rest in peace. Chapter 948. The war that had lasted for half a year came to an abrupt end just like that. The last few 100,000 Northern Tribe soldiers were all buried in Huifeng Valley. The entire valley was covered in blood, and corpses were everywhere. As for the scattered Northern Tribe soldiers who were stationed in various places, they were naturally not worth mentioning. They were all wiped out by the Mahist army at lightning speed. This battle seemed neither surprising nor exciting and unremarkable. However, in terms of battle results, it was enough to erase most of the records in the history of the Mahist army. Out of more than 1 million Northern Tribe soldiers, not a single one managed to escape. After this battle, the Northern Tribes had not only lost more than 1 million soldiers and horses, but also nearly 70% of their generals. They would definitely not be able to recover without a few decades. When the battlefield was cleaned up, the person who was escorted by the Mahist army to Emo Xiaoyao and the rest surprised everyone. This person was none other than the winged cavalry general of the Northern Tribes, Hellion Zhen. Even Yilu Yi had died in the chaos. No one had expected Hellion Zhen to still be alive. Emo Xiaoyao's handsome eyes darkened slightly as he glanced at the two soldiers who escorted Hellion Zhen over. The two of them hurriedly reported, "Prince, this person said that he has important news regarding the Northern Tribes to tell you." That's why everyone understood that at the last moment, Hellion Zhen was afraid of death and could only use this to exchange for a chance to save his life. Regarding this, the Mahist army generals not only looked at him with contempt, but also with hatred. 19 years ago, those Mahist army soldiers who died in vain did not even die at the hands of an indomitable hero. They died at the hands of a cowardly and shameless person. In fact, 19 years ago, Helian Jun was not necessarily a cowardly person. However, he had not been on the battlefield for more than a decade. Even when he was defeated by Mo Xiaoyao, he was far from being at his peak. After more than a decade, his original mentality and courage had long been worn away. All that was left was his unwillingness to lose to Mo Xiaoyao. When reality proved that he was indeed unable to defeat Mo Xiaoyao, even this bit of unwillingness disappeared. All that was left was his life. Prince Ding, as long as you spare my life, I am willing to tell you the distribution of the northern tribes' forces. Helian Jun's eyes were blazing as he said anxiously. He didn't want to die. Even 19 years ago, he wasn't so clear that he didn't want to die. Mo Xiaoyao's lips curled into a disdainful sneer. General Helian, you haven't held military power for 19 years. Do you really know the distribution of the northern tribes' military strength? Helian Jun was speechless. I can tell you everything I know, as long as you spare my life. At this time, Helian Jun finally realized that he didn't have the ability to negotiate with Mo Xiaoyao, and said, somewhat frantically. The killing intent in Mo Xiaoyao's eyes surged, but he did not act out immediately. He slowly closed his eyes and calmed his emotions. When he opened his eyes again, he was completely calm. However, Helian Jun faintly felt that something was wrong. Mo Xiaoyao's voice was as calm as still water. Drag him out and execute him. Yes. The two soldiers who escorted Helian Jun did not hesitate and dragged him out again. Hearing Helian Jun's frantic cries and pleas as he was dragged out, everyone felt a little sad for him. A famous general of a generation, even though his reputation was tarnished, he still couldn't escape death. There was a moment of silence in the tent, and everyone's expression was a little dazed. Yin Ting and the other young generals could not believe that they had really annihilated the northern tribes, who had more soldiers and horses than them and were comparable in strength. Sun Yao was stunned for a moment, then suddenly burst into tears. Although he did not have the enmity with the northern tribes, 3 years ago, the northern tribes invaded the Dechu state and killed countless people. Sun Yao's hatred for the northern tribes was not inferior to the Mahist army's elders. Zhou Min patted Sun Yao's shoulder and laughed. Old Sun, you cry too much. Isn't it a good thing that we won? Sun Yao wiped his eyes and said angrily, What do you know? I'm just happy, you know. Zhou Min rubbed her nose and decided not to lower herself to the same level as this boar. Mo Xiaoyao's expression was calm as he said in a low voice, All right, everyone reorganize and rest for 2 days. Zhou Min, Sun Yao will. Here. Zhou Min immediately stood up and replied loudly. Sun Yao also quickly stood up. Mo Xiaoyao said, I'll leave the border to the two of you. The rest of you head south in 2 days. Yes, General. Everyone replied in unison. The Chu state's northern border was extremely long, and only Zhou Min and Sun Yao were leading an army alone for the first time. One of them was originally only a general of a province, and it was definitely not enough. However, it was currently winter, and even if the northern tribes wanted to send reinforcements or take revenge for Yiluyi, it would be 2 months later. Moreover, after half a year of experience, the two of them were able to take on big responsibilities, so Mo Xiaoyao was not worried. Zhou Min was naturally happy to accept the order, and Sun Yaowu, as a surrendered general, was also very happy that Prince Ding trusted him so much. They accepted the order happily. The others also understood that they would be following Prince Ding to the south, and there would be countless fierce battles ahead. At the same time, it also meant that there would be more merits to be gained, so they were also looking forward to it. In a short time, the atmosphere in the tent became lively. Yili sat beside Mo Xiaoyao and quietly reached out to hold Mo Xiaoyao's hand. Mo Xiaoyao looked sideways at the smiling Yili beside him, his eyes filled with warmth and a smile. At the same time, he tightly held Yi Li's hand. Mo Xiaobao sat between the two of them, looking left and right at his father and mother. He also smiled and covered their hands with his own. On a small hill not far from Huifeng Valley, There was an inconspicuous lone grave. There was not even a tombstone in front of the lone grave, and the grave was covered with withered grass. If one did not pay attention, they would even think that this was really a small hill full of withered grass. Mo Xiaoyao held Yi Li's hand with one hand and Mo Xiaobao with the other hand, standing in front of the grave. Yi Li looked at Mo Xiaoyao with some confusion, and a trace of understanding flashed through her eyes. Mo Xiaoyao said softly, "Li, this is Big Brother." Yi Li did not ask much, nodded and went forward to bow, saying, "Sister-in-law Yi Li greets elder brother." Then she turned to Mo Xiaobao and said, "Xiaobao, kao to uncle." Mo Xiaobao blinked blankly. Although he did not understand why he had already seen his uncle's grave in the Chu capital, and now there was another one here, he still obediently walked to Yi Li's side and knelt down, respectfully kowtowing 3 times, saying, "Mo Yuchen kowtows to uncle." Mo Xiaoyao sighed slightly, lifted his clothes and knelt beside Yi Li, saying in a low voice, "Big brother, do you see? I have avenged you." Yi Li turned slightly and found that the position of the grave was facing Huifeng Valley. If one stood here alone, then they would have seen everything that happened in Huifeng Valley yesterday, clearly. Mo Xiaoyan had brought up Mo Xiaoyao when he was young, so he was naturally very respectful to this elder brother. So after so many years, Mo Xiaoyao had never forgotten to avenge his elder brother. But no one thought that Mo Xiaoyao would actually bury Mo Xiaoyan in such a remote and desolate place far from the Chu capital. Chapter 949. After kowtowing, Mo Xiaoyao helped Yi Li up and sat down at a place not far away from the grave. He held Yi Li's shoulder and said leisurely, "Everyone thought that eldest brother's remains were buried in the ancestral grave of King Ding's residence in the capital. But that's not the case. That year when I rushed to the border, Big Brother's remains had already been cremated. So I replaced him. Big Brother's real remains are buried here. I wanted to stay here and watch. One day, I will take revenge for him and the soldiers of the Mo family army who died in vain." Yi Li held his hand and smiled. "You did it. Big Brother will be very happy." Mo Xiaoyao was a little confused. "I don't know if Big Brother will be happy, but Big Brother will never come back." He had always wanted to take revenge, but when it was time to take revenge, his heart was filled with loneliness and emptiness. When Mo Jingqi died, Mo Xiaoyao already had this feeling. Now this feeling of emptiness was even stronger, because even if he killed all his enemies, the dead would never come back. "Xiaoyao," Yi Li called out worriedly. Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly. "Don't worry, I still have you, the Prince Ding Mansion, and the Mahist Army." Holding Yi Li's hand with a smile, and looking at the rarely seen obedient Mo Xiaobao beside him, Mo Xiaoyao felt warmth in his heart. Luckily there was Li, their child, and their family. Otherwise, Mo Xiaoyao would not know what to do with his life after taking revenge. Mo Xiaobao pouted, his eyes turning as he threw himself into Mo Xiaoyao's arms. "Father, you still have me and my little brother and sister. When I grow up, I will help you destroy the northern tribes." Mo Xiaoyao looked at him with a smile that was not a smile. "Is that so? I'll be waiting." Mo Xiaobao snorted unhappily. "Imperial Father is looking down on me. Just you wait. When I grow up, I will definitely destroy the northern tribes for you to see." Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said, "That's right. Aren't I just waiting to see?" Mo Xiaobao deeply felt that he was being looked down upon by his father. He was so angry that he started shouting. Grabbing on Mo Xiaoyao and refusing to let go, Yi Li couldn't help but smile as she watched the father and son quarrel. She said softly, "Do you want to move Big Brother's remains back to the Chu capital?" Mo Xiaoyao shook his head and smiled. "No need, just stay here. In the future, the Mo family's ancestral grave might not be in the Chu capital. Moreover, it was much quieter here. Don't you see that there aren't many nobles, generals, ministers, and emperors' mausoleums, all of them dazzling with gold and jade and rich enough to rival a country? Waiting for the rise and fall of the dynasty would only benefit the grave robbers. In the past year, there have been many major events. At the end of the year, the regent of the Chu state, Mo Jingli, who had settled down in Jiangnan, finally ascended the throne. Before the end of the year, there was another earth-shattering event in the north. The million-strong army that attacked the Chu state was completely destroyed by the Mahist army. Not a single person returned to the northern tribes. When this news came out, the world was shocked. Many citizens of the Chu state who had been forced to move were in tears, secretly planning to return to the north. Unfortunately, although the northern tribes had been destroyed, the north was still fighting. The king of Chu, Mo Jingli, who had ascended the throne less than half a month ago, led 700,000 troops to the north, vowing to reclaim the land. At this time, the Xiling army led by Lei Jinting had already broken through Ruichang and surrounded Wei City. Wei City was in danger. Wei City. On the city gate tower, Marquis Nan and Murong Shun sat facing each other, each playing a game of chess. Below the city gate tower, several li away, was the Xiling army's camp. Banners could be seen fluttering in the army camp. Even from afar, one could feel a monstrous fighting spirit. Murong Shun shook his head and helplessly threw down a chess piece, saying, "Marquis Nan, you can really keep your composure. I've never liked these things." Marquis Nan looked up and smiled, saying, "General Murong, please be patient." Murong Shun said impatiently, "Ruichang has already been lost. Now that Lei Jinting's army has surrounded Wei City, we can't do anything. How can I be patient?" Marquis Nan smiled, saying, "The situation is much better than expected, isn't it? Master I originally said that it would be good if we could defend Feihong Pass in 3 months. Now it's been more than 2 months, and Wei City is still in our hands. This means that the situation is not beyond Prince's expectations. Our military strength is not as good as Lei Jinting's, and our military strategy is also inferior to his. General Murong, why do you blame yourself?" Murong Shun sighed and looked at Marquis Nan embarrassedly, saying, "It's me who can't bear it. I've been on the battlefield for half my life. It's the first time that I've been suppressed and beaten without any resistance." Murong Shun had fought hundreds of battles in his life. Of course, there were victories and defeats, but this was the first time that he had been beaten to the point of being unable to raise his head. It was inevitable that he was upset. Marquis Nan smiled, saying, "Lei Jinting is known as the West Hill War God. In his life, he has only been defeated by the former Prince Regent and the current Princess Ding. If it weren't for him, why would Prince take the risk of destroying the northern tribes first so that he could focus on Lei Jinting? As for Mo Jingli's Chu state, to be honest, the Mahist army did not really care about it. Half of the Chu state's famous generals were now in the Prince Ding mansion. In these years, they had not heard of any outstanding young generals. Mo Jingli was not inferior to Mo Jingqi's paranoia. He would only firmly hold the military power in his hands to prevent a second Prince Ding mansion from appearing into Chu state to take away his military power. Murong Shun nodded, saying, "Thank you for your reminder, Marquis Nan." Marquis Nan patted his shoulder and smiled, saying, "Just relax. No matter what, we have to stay in Wei City until Prince comes back. No matter what, we can't go to Feihong Pass and cause trouble for General Yuan, right?" Murong Shun nodded and smiled, saying, "Marquis Nan is right." Reporting to Marquis Nan, General Murong, "There's an urgent message from 800 Li. At the bottom of the city tower, a soldier hurried up and handed over a sealed letter. Marquis Nan took it and opened it. He was overjoyed. Seeing his strange expression, Murong Shun quickly asked, "Is there any good news from Prince's side?" Marquis Nan nodded and smiled, saying, "Yes, Prince has wiped out the Northern Tribes' army in Huifeng Valley. He killed the 7th Prince of the Northern Tribes and captured Helian Jun alive." Hearing this news, Murong Shun was also very excited. Although they had now submitted to the Prince Ding mansion, they were still citizens of the Chu state. Their hatred for the Northern Tribes was no less than anyone else's. Now that they heard the news that Prince Ding had wiped out the Northern Tribes' army, They could not help but feel relieved. Marquis Nin pulled Murong Shun back and smiled, saying, "General, it's urgent. Prince will arrive in a few days. But before that, the news can't be leaked." Murong Shun understood. He looked up and glanced at the West Hill barracks in the distance and smiled, saying, "Marquis Nan, don't worry. I promise that even a bird won't be able to fly over the top of the city walls." The two of them looked at each other and could not help but stand up and laugh. The soldiers guarding outside heard the laughter of the two commanders. Although they did not know why the two commanders were so happy, they could not help but feel relieved. In the West Hill barracks, Lei Jinting frowned and looked at the reports in front of him. He glanced at the generals below and asked in a low voice, "Is there any news from the northern tribes?" Lei Tingfeng stepped forward and said, "Father, there has been no news from the northern tribes in the past few days. Now that the north is bitterly cold, I'm afraid that the Mahist army and the northern tribes army are moving slowly. It is normal that there is no news." Chapter 950. Lei Jinting furrowed his brows and shook his head. No, Mo Xiaoyao knew that Mo Jingli's army would not come near, but he still dared to go to the north. He definitely would not drag his feet. "I'm afraid the northern tribes have already met with a problem." "Father, you mean?" Lei Tongfeng paused and said, "The northern tribes' military strength is not weaker than the Mahist army. In fact, they are even stronger. Even if Mo Xiaoyao wants to completely defeat the northern tribes, he will not be able to do so without a few months." Lei Jinting shook his head and looked at Lei Tingfeng with some regret. "Tongfeng, you are good at everything, but you are always stuck to common sense and do not dare to indulge in wild fantasies." Lei Tingfeng's face was a little awkward, and he asked in confusion, "Indulging in wild fantasies? Is that a good thing?" Lei Jinting laughed. "If you can't do it, then you are indulging in wild fantasies. If you can do it, then you are strategizing." "Father, you believe that Mo Xiaoyao could defeat the northern tribes in 2 short months? But they have already dragged on for a few months and only won by a small margin." Lei Tingfeng furrowed his brows and said. Lei Jinting pondered and frowned. "So, I suspect that Mo Xiaoyao was hiding his strength on purpose. Although the Mahist army's performance last year was not bad, but compared to their previous results, it can be said that their performance was average, or even a huge drop in standard. Then, if the northern tribes really lose..." Lei Tingfeng furrowed his brows and said. Lei Jinting said, "Then it will be our turn to face Mo Xiaoyao head-on. Now that Mo Jingli's army has arrived, even if Mo Xiaoyao returns, our chances of winning will still be higher. Furthermore, I would rather face Mo Xiaoyao head-on than be schemed against in the dark." Only when she looked back and thought about it carefully could she see what kind of chess game Mo Xiaoyao had set up. Every time he thought about it, Lei Jinting felt a burst of fear and trepidation. The situation of the world in the past few years, the many battles, the changes in the power structure, had long been under Mo Xiaoyao's control. In other words, the current situation of the world was going according to Mo Xiaoyao's expectations. How could such intelligence and ability not be frightening? No wonder the Emperor of the Chu State was so secretive about the Prince Ding mansion and was so afraid of it. Father is right. Then we should attack Wei City with all our might. If we can take Fei Hong Pass before Mo Xiaoyao returns, we will have the upper hand, Lei Tingfeng said. Lei Jinting nodded and smiled. "That's right. As for Mo Jingli, send someone to tell him not to keep thinking about the Chu capital. Even if he takes the Chu capital now, he won't be able to hold it. Have him lead his army to the west and flank us from the north. This will prevent Mo Xiaoyao from defeating us one by one." In the end, Lei Jinting was still worried about the abilities of the Chu state's generals. As the Genom king of Gojozi and of Xiling, he didn't need to care about the lives of the people of the Chu state. But now they were in an alliance. They were bound together for good or ill. Lei Jinting couldn't help but worry. "Yes, father." Lei Tingfeng nodded and accepted the order. With Lei Jinting's order, the attack on Wei City became even more intense. Even Nan Ho and Murong Shun, who had been bitterly holding on, felt that they couldn't hold on any longer. Standing on top of the city gate tower and looking at the rivers of blood below, the soldiers on top of the city gate also looked exhausted. The Mahist army stationed at Wei City repelled another attack from the Shilling army. But they all knew that the Shilling army wouldn't retreat so easily. After a short rest, they would charge again. Murong-shin stood on top of the city gate tower and looked at the Shilling army not far away. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Is Lei Jinting crazy? He's been attacking nonstop for the past few days. Even if he takes Wei City, he will suffer heavy losses." Nanho sighed and said, "Lei Jinting probably already knows that the prince is coming back soon." Murong-shun frowned. Nanho smiled and said, "Even if we block the news, he will still be suspicious if he doesn't receive any news. With Lei Jinting's intelligence, it's not hard for him to guess that the northern tribes have been defeated." Murong-shin thought about it and agreed. He glanced at the city gate and was about to say something, but his expression changed, and he said, "They're coming again." The war drums shook the sky. The soldiers who were resting immediately rushed forward and were ready for battle. In the distance, the Shilling army rushed over aggressively with their banners fluttering in the wind. Lei Tingfeng took the lead and rushed to the city gate. He pointed his long whip at Nan Ho and Murong-shun on top of the city gate tower and said with a smile, "Nan Ho, General Murong, why are you so stubborn? Wei City only has a few 100,000 soldiers now. How can you resist the millions of soldiers of Weiling? Why don't you surrender to Weiling? My father will definitely treat you with courtesy. Needless to say, you will be promoted." Nanho smiled faintly and said, "Thank you, Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon, for thinking highly of me. But, although I have no talent and no virtue, I can't do something like betrayal." Murong-shun was not in the mood to talk nonsense with him. He said loudly, "Cut the crap. If you want to fight, let's fight." Lei Tingfeng's face darkened slightly. He smiled faintly and said, "You don't have to be angry. I'm thinking for the two generals. Both of you are famous generals. Why should you sacrifice your lives for a battle that you are sure to lose?" Murong-shun snorted and grabbed a bow, an arrow from a soldier beside him. He shot an arrow at Lei Tingfeng. Lei Tingfeng stepped aside to avoid the arrow. His face was a little ugly. He pointed his whip at the people on top of the city gate and said sternly, "Murong-shun, you don't know how to appreciate kindness. Don't blame me for being merciless." Murong-shun sneered and said, "I don't know what kind of relationship I have with Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon. If you want to fight, let's fight. There are no cowards in the Mahist army." Lei Tingfeng was humiliated by Murong-shun in front of the Shilling army. He didn't want to be long-winded. He said sternly, "Attack." Behind the Shilling army, Lei Jinting looked at Lei Tingfeng's actions from a distance and shook his head helplessly. He sighed softly and said, "Tungfeng still can't keep his cool." He didn't mean that he had to persuade Nan Ho and Murong-shun to surrender. It was just that Lei Tingfeng was so easily provoked. It was really not something a leader should do. Chapter 9:51. It was another hard battle. When it was late, they finally managed to beat back the West Hill army again. Even Murong-shun had suffered some minor injuries. The two of them stood on the city gate tower, looking at the Shilling army that was gradually retreating. They finally showed a tired but happy smile. Before their smile faded, Marquis Nan frowned and said in a low voice, "General Murong, rest well tonight. I will take care of everything." Murong-shun was tired and injured after days of hard work. If he didn't rest, he would really fall. Murong-shun frowned and glanced at the West Hill camp in the distance. "I'm afraid that the West Hill army will launch another sneak attack tonight." In the past 2 days, the West Hill army's attacks had obviously become fiercer and more impatient. After days of hard fighting, the defenders of the Acropolis were almost at their limit. If the Shilling army attacked a few more times, the Acropolis would not be able to withstand it. Marquis Nan smiled faintly. "Don't worry. Don't you have me? General Murong, don't worry and go rest." Murong-shun also understood Marquis Nan's good intentions and nodded. "Then I'll have to trouble you." Marquis Nan nodded and smiled faintly. In the Shilling army's tent, Lei Tingfeng checked the wound on his arm and frowned. I didn't expect Marquis, Nan, and Murong Shun to be so good at fighting. In today's fierce battle, not only was Murong Shun injured, even Lei Tingfeng was slightly injured in the chaos. However, it was not a big deal. Lei Jinting was not surprised and said indifferently. Marquis Nan was also a famous general in the Dechu state and was conferred the title of Marquis because of his military achievements. When Murong Shun was young, he was one of the best generals under Mo Lufang. With the two of them working together, you can't break the Acropolis in a short time. Hearing Lei Jinting's words, Lei Tingfeng's face showed a trace of uneasiness. He said, "Father, please advise me." Looking at Lei Tingfeng, Lei Jinting sighed helplessly. Although he only had one son, Lei Tingfeng, but compared to Mo Lufang, he clearly did not know how to teach his son. It wasn't that Lei Tingfeng wasn't outstanding, it was just that compared to Mo Xiaoyao, he wasn't outstanding enough. However, it was also because of this that people felt even more dissatisfied and depressed. Lei Tingfeng didn't have it easy either. He was about the same age as Mo Xiaoyao, but very few people would compare him to Mo Xiaoyao. It was because he didn't have the right to do so. Lei Jinting said, "Marquis Nan and Murong Shun are already at the end of their rope. As long as you speed up the siege, you will definitely be able to take Wei City before Mo Xiaoyao comes back. You don't have to worry about that. But, you want to subdue Marquis Nan and Murong Shun?" Lei Tingfeng's heart skipped a beat. He lowered his head and said, Son just thinks that these two are rare talents." Lei Jinting smiled helplessly and waved his hand. "It's not that Father doesn't agree with you subduing some capable people for your own use. But I want to see what kind of people you want. You can't control Marquis, Nan, and Murong Shun." Lei Tingfeng raised his eyebrows, his face showing a trace of unwillingness. Lei Jinting said indifferently, "These two people can be called famous generals who have been through hundreds of battles. Murong Shun is arrogant. If you want to subdue him, you have to have the ability that is absolutely stronger than him. He was also Mo Liufang's old subordinate, so he naturally has a good impression of the Mahist army. Now that he has returned to the Mahist army, he will only be more loyal. Moreover, Murong Shun's only daughter is married to Leng Huai's second son, Leng Haoyu. And Leng Haoyu is Mo Xiaoyao's trusted aide, second only to Feng Zhiyao. Under these circumstances, do you think Murong Shun will be loyal to you?" As for Marquis Nan, he was even more difficult to deal with than Murong Shun, although he had been quiet for years and was not well known. Although he has not been famous for many years, his arrogance in his youth is no less than Murong Shun's. Therefore, defecting to the enemy at the last minute will never happen to them. Lei Tingfeng's uninjured hand clenched tightly. In fact, it was not that he did not understand his father's words, but in his ears there was another layer of meaning. He was not capable enough, so he could not subdue Murong Shun and Marquis Nan. Hearing his father say this, in Lei Tingfeng's heart, it was no different from his father saying he was incompetent to his face. "I am incompetent. Father, please forgive me." Lei Tingfeng lowered his eyes and said in a low voice. Seeing him like this, Lei Jinting could only sigh. After a while, he said, "It's not your fault. Don't think so much. Right now, the most important thing is to take Acropolis." Lei Tingfeng adjusted his expression and nodded. "Don't worry. Father, I know what to do." In the middle of the night, Acropolis stood in the middle of the vast wilderness, looking somewhat lonely. Under the night sky, the Mahist army soldiers stood on top of the city gate tower, steadfastly guarding this small city. In the darkness, a group of people quietly approached the city wall. A man in black quietly climbed up the city gate tower. Whoosh! An arrow shot out from the darkness, and the man in black who had climbed up the wall fell to the ground with a muffled groan. A light lit up on top of the city wall, and the originally quiet city immediately became lively again. In a moment, the sound of fighting and the smell of blood filled the entire wilderness. This night attack lasted until dawn. The Mahist army soldiers, who had been bitterly fighting for several days, finally couldn't hold on any longer. Heavy logs smashed open the gates of Acropolis. After a bitter battle, both sides suffered heavy losses. At dawn, Marquis Nin finally ordered the Mahist army soldiers to withdraw from Acropolis. Lei Tongfeng, who was leading the troops into the city, looked at the sound of the Mahist army leaving. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and he ordered in a deep voice, "Chase! Whoever obtains the heads of Marquis Nan and Murong Shun will be rewarded with 10,000 taels of gold." Prince's orders. The general following, Lei Tongfeng, hesitated for a moment and couldn't help but advise him in a low voice. Lei Tongfeng's gaze was like a knife, and he coldly said, "I's the one leading the troops now. I will explain to Father later. The Mahist army has fled, and our troops should take advantage of their high morale to pursue them." "But," Lei Tongfeng sternly said, "shut up. This is I's order." Helpless, the general could only nod and agree. This general obeys. Lei Tongfeng took the lead, leading the Shilling army through Acropolis, and continued to pursue the retreating Mahist army. Not long after, Lei Jinting arrived at Acropolis, but he didn't see Lei Tongfeng. His expression darkened, and he asked, "Where is Prince?" The generals looked at each other for a while before one of them stepped forward and reported, "Your Highness, the Crown Prince led the army to chase after Marquis Nan and Murong Shun." Hearing this, Lei Jinting's expression changed, and he heavily slammed his hand on the desk, angrily saying, "How dare you? I told him not to act rashly." The general said awkwardly, "But Prince." Lei Jinting sighed helplessly as he looked at the helpless faces of the generals below. Lei Tongfeng was the prince of Genom of Gojoseon and the only heir of Jinan Palace. These generals naturally didn't dare to disobey his orders, and if he insisted on doing something, they naturally didn't dare to stop him. Lei Jinting was a genius, and he only needed to think a little to understand the reason why Lei Tongfeng suddenly acted so impulsively. It was because of his previous advice. He was afraid that Lei Tongfeng didn't listen to his advice, and instead thought that he, as a father, underestimated his ability. Chapter 952. "Prince, what should we do now?" the general below asked in a low voice. Lei Jinting thought for a moment and said, "General of the right, take 50,000 men and horses to support the Crown Prince." After thinking for a moment, Lei Jinting said again, "If the Crown Prince wins, you don't have to worry about it. If the Crown Prince falls into a trap, you save him." General of the right stepped out and said in a low voice, "Yes, sir." At this time, Lei Tongfeng had really fallen into a trap. On the narrow mountain road leading to Feihong Pass, Lei Tongfeng and his tens of thousands of men and horses were besieged. They were in a dilemma. Murong Shun and Marquis Nin stood side by side on a hillside not far away. Murong Shun sneered and looked down at Lei Tongfeng, who was inexplicably angry. Murong Shun took a bow and arrow from a soldier beside him and pointed it at Lei Tongfeng. He said with a smile, "We lost Acropolis, but killed the Crown Prince of Genom of Gojoseon of West Hill. That's a gain, isn't it?" Lei Jinting of Genom of Gojoseon only had one son, Lei Tongfeng. Most of Lei Tongfeng's children were killed by Prince Ding more than a year ago. If Lei Tongfeng died, it would be a fatal blow to Lei Jinting. Marquis Nin reached out to stop him from shooting the arrow. He shook his head and said, "No, if we kill Lei Tongfeng now, Lei Jinting will definitely go crazy." "So what?" Murong Shun raised his eyebrows and said. Marquis Nin smiled helplessly and said, "Don't forget that there are hundreds of thousands of ordinary people in Acropolis. Lei Jinting doesn't kill ordinary people like the northern tribes, but it doesn't mean that he won't kill." The pain of losing his son was enough to make Lei Jinting do anything crazy. What's more, if they killed Lei Tongfeng, they would have to face Lei Jinting directly. At that time, he would only lose even faster. What does Marquis Nin mean? Murong Shun was able to dominate the battlefield. Naturally, he would not rely on his martial arts alone. Soon, he figured out Marquis Nan's intention. He laughed and said, "This mountain path is easy to defend but hard to attack. We can trap Lei Tongfeng inside and make Lei Jinting hesitate to attack. We can delay him for a few more days." Stroking his beautiful beard, Nanho nodded and said with a smile, Exactly. Marquis Nan, Murong Shun. Come out and talk. Lei Tengfeng, who was trapped on the mountain path, roared in a deep voice. He really did not expect that Marquis, Nan, and Murong Shun would still have some strength left when they retreated from Wei City. He rashly led less than 100,000 troops to chase after them, and actually fell into their trap. In fact, it was already a mistake for him to rashly enter such a narrow mountain path. After calming down, Lei Tengfeng secretly regretted his impulsiveness. Murong Shun laughed loudly and said, "Prince Jinim of Gojoseon, I did not expect that we would meet again so soon." Lei Tengfeng looked up at Murong Shun and Marquis Nan, who were not far away, and said in a deep voice, "You can torture or kill me as you wish." Murong Shun snorted disdainfully and looked at Lei Tengfeng with a smile, saying, "Interesting. Jinim of Gojoseon has always been smart and calm. I did not expect that he would have such a hot-blooded son. Yesterday, Prince Jinim of Gojoseon wanted me and Marquis Nan to surrender to the West Hill. Now, Prince Jinim of Gojoseon, do you want to consider surrendering to my princely mansion?" Lei Tengfeng's face turned green and white. After a while, he gritted his teeth and said, "Murong Shun, how dare you humiliate I?" Marquis Nan smiled kindly and said, "Prince Lei, what you said yesterday was no different from a humiliation to me and General Murong. Since we all know that it is impossible, why did you say it?" Lei Tengfeng was silent. Murong Shun smiled and said, "Isn't that because Prince Jinim of Gojoseon was confident that he could defeat us? But he did not expect that every dog has its day. Now he's the one who is besieged. What a pity. Jinim of Gojoseon of West Hill was a hero for a lifetime, but he has such a useless son." Murong Shun's words made Lei Tengfeng's face turn pale. In fact, with Lei Tengfeng's ability, he could not be called a useless son. But in this world, there was always someone better than him. Lei Tengfeng grew up under his father's halo, which could be said to be overshadowed. In this way, Murong Shun's unintentional ridicule became a weight that he could not bear. Lei Tengfeng smiled bitterly and said, "General Murong is right. My father has been wise all his life, but he only has me, a useless son. I have really lost my father's face. I have been defeated like this. How can I face the soldiers of West Hill?" As he said, he raised the long sword in his hand and was about to cut his neck. Murong Shun was also stunned. He did not expect that his casual words could make Lei Tengfeng so determined to die. Was the son of Jinim of Gojoseon so weak? Lung Haoyu had been called a foppish son, a useless son, and a libertine since he was young, but he was still alive and kicking. Bang! The guard beside, Lei Tengfeng hurriedly pulled out his sword to block Lei Tengfeng's sword. He shouted, "Your Highness, Murong Shun is talking nonsense. You don't have to take it to heart. How can you face the prince if you lose your life so easily? You are the only heir of Jinnan Palace." Lei Tengfeng stared blankly at the long sword in his hand, lost in thought. In fact, he just pulled out the sword to commit suicide because of a moment of impulse and sadness. At this time, when he came back to his senses and looked at the sword in his hand, he felt a chill in his heart. Murong Shun was relieved to see that Lei Tengfeng was fine. He sneered loudly and said, "Now I know that the crown prince of Jinim of Gojoseon is actually a coward who avoids failure." Lei Tengfeng immediately calmed down. He said in a low voice, "Thank you for your advice, General Murong. I was confused for a moment. This time, this crown prince has lost, but this crown prince will definitely not let this matter rest. If I leave this place alive, I will take revenge." Murong Shun looked at Lei Tengfeng, who had a determined face below, and laughed. "This guy is a little interesting." Marquis Nan laughed. He was protected too well by Jinim of Gojoseon. If he can survive this, he must have made a lot of progress. Not long after, the general of the right of West Hill led the troops and arrived. Naturally, there was another fierce battle between the two sides. Although the Mahist army was tired, they were evenly matched with the Shilling army by taking advantage of the terrain. They held on for a day and a night on this small mountain path. The next morning, when Lei Tengfeng finally broke out of the encirclement of the Mahist army and met with the reinforcements of West Hill, the reinforcements of the Mahist army arrived. There were not many reinforcements of the Mahist army. There were only 4 or 5 people. The two in front were Mo Xiaoyao and Yili in white. Even Mo Xiaoyao was sitting on the back of his horse, drowsy Mo Xiaobao. Behind them were Feng Zhiyao, Yunting, and Zhuijing. Although he did not see the reinforcements, Lei Tengfeng did not dare to act rashly. Marquis Nan and Murongshan were relieved when they saw Mo Xiaoyao and the others. "Greetings, Prince. We failed to defend the city. Please forgive us, Prince." Mo Xiaoyao waved his sleeves and stopped the two who were about to kneel down and beg for forgiveness. "You have done your best. Don't blame yourselves." Mo Xiaoyao smiled as he looked at Lei Tengfeng, who was glaring at him like a tiger watching its prey, and said, "Young Master Lei, do you want to leave by yourself? Or do you want to stay and reminisce with this prince?" Chapter 9:53. Lei Tengfeng's eyes flashed, but his heart was in turmoil. At this moment, the Shilling army had the absolute advantage. If they attacked, they would definitely be able to wipe out Marquis Nan and Murongshan's troops. But if Mo Xiaoyao and Yili appeared here, would they not bring any reinforcements? Lei Tengfeng did not believe it. But if Mo Xiaoyao really did not bring any reinforcements, then he would have missed a great opportunity to avenge his humiliation. With all kinds of torment in his heart, Lei Tengfeng stared at Mo Xiaoyao, also in a dilemma. After a long time, he still did not dare to gamble. He sighed and said in a low voice, "I greet your Highness Prince Ding. I did not expect your Highness Prince Ding to arrive in time." Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, "Prince Lei, you flatter me. I was just lucky. If I could arrive before your Highness took Wei City, then it would be considered timely. Your Highness now, are you planning to fight with I?" Lei Tengfeng forced a smile and said, "I admit that I am not Prince's opponent. Moreover, both sides are already very tired. Why not fight another day?" And Mo Xiaoyao pondered for a moment, then finally nodded and said, "In that case, your Highness, please." Lei Tengfeng's face darkened. He nodded and said, "I will take my leave." Watching Lei Tengfeng leave with his army, Murongshan raised his eyebrows and said, "How many reinforcements did Prince Ding bring?" The current situation was very clear. Their troops were absolutely no match for Lei Tengfeng. For Lei Tengfeng to leave at this time, it was clear that he was afraid of Prince Ding's reinforcements. Mo Xiaoyao said lightly, "The reinforcements are still 100 miles away. I only brought a few people." That Lei Tengfeng, he thought that I brought a lot of people, but I lied to him that I didn't bring anyone. However, he really didn't bring anyone with him. Therefore, while it wasn't good for a general to be too impulsive, it wasn't good to be too cautious either. However, Lei Tengfeng's choice to leave at this time was not bad. Even though Mo Xiaoyao did not bring any troops with him, killing Lei Tengfeng in the midst of the chaos was still a simple task. Acropolis, Genum of Gojoseon's study room. Lei Tengfeng knelt on the ground in silence. Lei Jinting concentrated on the booklet in his hand, as if he did not see the person kneeling on the ground. After a long time, Lei Jinting finished reading the thick stack of booklets in his hands. Only then did he raise his head to glance at Lei Tengfeng and say, "Get up." Lei Tengfeng lowered his eyes and said, "Your son acted rashly and was greedy for merit. He almost fell into the hands of the Prince Ding mansion. Father, please punish me." "Punish?" Lei Jinting sneered and said, "I only said a few words to you, and you rushed to your death. How could I dare punish you?" Hearing Lei Jinting's words, Lei Tengfeng felt even more ashamed. "Your son knows his wrongs." Bang! Lei Jinting fiercely slammed his palm on the desk and said angrily, "You know your wrongs? Your wrongs are to draw your sword and cut your own throat? What a heroic spirit! This prince has given birth to a good son who can support both heaven and earth. This prince is truly ashamed of his inferiority. Since you're not afraid of death, why did you come back?" Lei Jinting was furious. With a wave of his hand, The sword hanging on the wall flew out of its scabbard and fell in front of Lei Tingfeng. Lei Jinting said, "Didn't you want to cut your own throat to atone for your wrongs? I'll give you a chance." "Father, this child knows his wrongs. Your son was muddle-headed for a moment. Please forgive me." Lei Tingfeng was really ashamed. His eyes couldn't help but turn red. He knelt on the ground and rubbed his knees against Lei Jinting's, hugged his thigh, and cried. Looking at his son, who was already past his prime, Lei Jinting's heart softened. He helplessly sighed and said, "Forget it, get up." Lei Tingfeng looked at Lei Jinting and stood up. "Thank you, father." Looking at Lei Tingfeng's listless appearance, Lei Jinting also felt a little guilty. He knew that his son was already outstanding enough. A genius like Immerse Xiaoyao was something that could only be encountered and not sought. However, Lei Tingfeng had always been strict with himself because of his father. Thus, he never received the praise he deserved. Doing well was what he should do because he was the son of Genom of Gojoseon. Like father, like son, if he did wrong, he would lose Genom of Gojoseon's face. Lei Tingfeng wasn't an impulsive person. If it wasn't for the pressure he was under, he definitely wouldn't have acted so impulsively these 2 days. "Tungfeng, these years, father has let you down." Lei Jinting sighed and said in a deep voice. Lei Tingfeng couldn't help but be stunned. He stared blankly at Lei Jinting's guilty expression and was momentarily speechless. He could only mumble, "Father, this son." Lei Tingfeng waved his hand and said, "These years, people have always talked about how great the son of Genom of Gojoseon is, but they have always forgotten that you are already an adult. This is also father's fault. Father has always felt that this pressure might be a motivation for you to work hard. However, I didn't think that it would be so difficult for you to bear." "Father, it's son's fault," Lei Tingfeng said in a low voice. "Son and Prince Ding are about the same age, but I can't even compare to Prince Ding's achievements. Son has lost father's face." Lei Jinting smiled bitterly and said, "Immerse Xiaoyao, father has never compared you to Immerse Xiaoyao." Lei Tingfeng's face paled and said, "Son is not worthy to be compared to Prince Ding." Lei Jinting sighed and said, "Tungfeng, father has indeed envied Immerse Xiaoyao for having such a capable son." Chapter 954. Lei Jinting looked at his son in front of him with gratification. Although it was a little inappropriate for a man in his 30s to still have red eyes, this was the truest expression that Lei Tingfeng had shown in front of him in all these years. Walking in front of Lei Tingfeng, Lei Jinting patted him on the shoulder and nodded. "Father believes that you will not disappoint me. Sit down and tell me about Immerse Xiaoyao." Previously, Lei Jinting was furious because of Lei Tingfeng's suicide, so he did not have time to discuss with him the sudden appearance of Immerse Xiaoyao and the others. Lei Jinting himself wasn't sure if protecting Lei Tingfeng all these years was a good thing for his son's future. But as a father, he couldn't force his son to go through some disasters that ordinary people couldn't bear just for the sake of his son's success. Lei Jinting was obsessed with winning against the Prince Ding mansion and Mo Lufeng, but he had never thought of forcing this obsession onto his son. Lei Tingfeng nodded and walked to the side to sit down. He recounted in detail how he saw Immerse Xiaoyao on the battlefield. Hearing him finish, Lei Jinting sighed slightly and said, "Tungfeng, you were deceived by Immerse Xiaoyao. He did not have time to bring back the troops." Lei Tingfeng frowned. Lian Shan's eyes flashed with a trace of annoyance. Compared to Prince Ding, there was still a big difference. Lei Jinting looked at him with a smile and said, "But you don't have to be sad. I'm glad that you did not impulsively lead the troops to attack. Even if they destroyed Nanhou and Murong Shun's Maist army, it would only be a small victory. It could even be said that it would not affect the overall situation, but it would definitely not be able to hurt Immerse Xiaoyao. However, in a fit of rage, Immerse Xiaoyao could easily kill Lei Tingfeng. Such an exchange was not worth it for the West Hill and Jinan Palace." Lei Tingfeng looked at Lei Jinting in confusion, but he quickly understood. With Immerse Xiaoyao's martial arts, killing him was a simple matter. Looking at his father's smiling eyes, Lei Tingfeng lowered his head apologetically. "This son has made father worry." Lei Jinting nodded in relief. Lei Dingfeng would not act impulsively in the future if he could think things through. As long as he could remain calm, with his ability, it would not be a problem for him to stay alive. All right, it's good that you're all right. It was all thanks to you that we were able to take down Acropolis. Right now, both the Dechu State and West Hill are pressuring us. Our army has also taken down Ruichang and Acropolis. Right now, we still have the advantage, Lei Jinting said. Lei Dingfeng nodded. Father, are you worried about Mo Jingli? If our army can restrain Prince Ding and most of the generals of the Mahist army, Mo Jingli should be able to handle it. The Mahist army was indeed full of famous generals, but there were too many places that the Mahist army needed to defend. One of the original 3 generals of the Mahist army, Zhang Qilan, had been guarding the former Emperor Shiling's city to assist 4th young Master Su in governing West Hill. He could not return to participate in the war. Leng Huai also had to guard the Chu capital to deter the northerners from going back on their word. General Yuan Pei was already old. He could defend the city, but he did not have enough energy to mount a horse and kill the enemy. As a result, the Mahist army only had Marquis Nan, Lu Jingxian, Murong Shun, and a few others left. As for Yun Ting, Zhou Min, He Su, and a few other rising stars, their future might be bright, but at present, they might not be able to compete with the old generals of West Hill. After all, a genius like Mo Xiuyao, who could sweep through the various countries at the age of 10, was an anomaly even in the Prince Ding mansion. Lei Jinting frowned. Don't forget, there's still Yi Li. Lei Dingfeng raised his eyebrows. He had indeed forgotten about Yi Li, but this woman was the most unforgettable. Although she usually did not reveal her talents, her battle achievements were not inferior to any of the current famous generals. If she were to fight against Mo Jingli, it would be worrying whether Mo Jingli would win or lose. Prince, a secret letter from the north has arrived. Outside the door, a guard reported in a low voice. Lei Jinting's eyes darkened. He said indifferently, "Bring it to me." Since Mo Xiuyao had returned, the situation in the north was no longer a secret. The guard pushed the door open, presented the letter, and retreated. Lei Jinting opened the letter and read it. His expression changed. In the end, he just sighed and passed the letter to Lei Dingfeng. Lei Dingfeng took the letter and read it with some doubt. His expression suddenly changed. He said in horror, Mo Xiuyao actually wiped out the entire Northern Tribes army. Yilu Yi and Helian Zhun are both dead. Looking at the final battle between the Mahist army and the Northern Tribes, Lei Dingfeng's emotions were still very complicated even though the knot in his heart had been untied. To be honest, from Lei Dingfeng's point of view, he really could not see what was so special about this battle. It could be said that this was an extremely unusual night attack. However, it still managed to wipe out the Northern Tribes army that had swept through the entire northern Dechu state 2 to 3 years ago. He raised his head to look at Lei Jinting. Lei Jinting stood in front of the map and pondered for a moment. Then, he pointed at a certain point on the map and asked, "Where is this place?" Huifeng Valley? Lei Jinting said, "This is the place where the Mahist army was defeated 19 years ago. Not far from here is where Mo Xiuan died." Lei Dingfeng was stunned. Very quickly, he took in a deep breath and said, "Father, are you saying that Prince Ding purposely led the Northern Tribes army to Huifeng Valley to wipe them out? In fact, he already had the ability to wipe out the Northern Tribes army before this?" Mo Xiuyao, was Lei Dingfeng said indifferently. That might not be the case. If not for the fact that the Mahist army had been holding back for half a year, Yilu Yi would have been able to wipe out the Northern Tribes army. How could he have let Yilu Yi believe that the Mahist army was only on par with the Northern Tribes army? How could he have let Yilu Yi down his guard and thought that he could attack the Mahist army camp at night? Lei Dingfeng nodded. Father's analysis was not wrong. However, Mo Xiuyao was able to watch Ruichang Wei City fall and drag out the time to wipe out the Northern Tribes army at Huifeng Valley. His courage was enough to make one gasp in admiration. When this battle was announced to the world, the prestige of the Mahist army and the Prince Ding mansion would definitely rise again. the morale of the Mahist army would definitely be higher than it was now. When facing the Western Tomb and the Dechu State Army, they would not have the slightest doubt or fear. Lei Jinting sighed and said, Tungfeng immediately set out to see Mo Jingli. You definitely cannot let that idiot be defeated by Yi Li before our two armies meet. In other words, Lei Jinting was already certain that Yi Li would definitely go to stop the Dechu State Army. Lei Tungfeng frowned and said, Mo Jingli is a stubborn and self-opinionated person. I'm afraid that he won't listen to his son. Lei Jinting thought for a while and nodded. I will write a letter for you. You bring it to him. As for if he listens to you, that's fine. If he insists on not listening, then let him be. You take another group of troops and hide in the dark. If Mo Jingli's army is defeated. Lei Tungfeng understood and nodded. Your son understands. Lei Jinting nodded with satisfaction and said, Remember, if you fight with Yi Li, you must not act rashly. Even though Yi Li is a woman, she is full of tricks and is best at luring the enemy. Chapter 955. Yes, I will remember your teachings. Feihong Pass because of the fall of the Acropolis. The Mahist army retreated to the front lines of Feihong Pass and Lingzhou Mountain. Old General Yuan Pei, who was stationed at Feihong Pass, was also very happy to see Prince Ding and Princess Consort. Although the old general was not afraid of dying on the battlefield, he knew that he was old and his energy was not as good as before. It would be even more difficult to defeat Genom of Gojoseon. Now that Prince Ding and Princess Consort had rushed back and saved millions of people in Feihong Pass from the disaster of war, the old general was naturally very happy. After welcoming Yi Li and the others into Feihong Pass and sitting down, Marquis Nan and Murong Shun both knelt down and asked for forgiveness. Prince, please punish us for the loss of the Acropolis. Mo Xiaoyao helped the two up with a smile and said, There is no need to be like this. This battle was not your fault. If I had not delayed, how could the Acropolis have fallen? If that's the case, shouldn't this prince be punished first? Marquis Nin quickly said, Prince has his reasons for delaying. Prince naturally has his reasons. Losing Ruichong and the Acropolis is my fault for being useless. Mo Xiaoyao shook his head and said, Marquis Nan and General Murong, there is no need to be like this. This matter is not your fault. If you had not tried your best to resist Lei Jinting, I am afraid that I would not have had the time to wipe out the Northern Tribe's army so successfully. If you insist on asking for forgiveness, won't people say that I did not reward and punish you? Seeing that Mo Xiaoyao really did not blame them, the two quickly thanked him. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, You two have worked hard these days. Sit down. General Yuan Pei, who was sitting on the side, could not hold back and quickly asked, Prince really wiped out the Northern Tribe's army? Mo Xiaoyao nodded and smiled. That's right. Feng Jiao, who was seated below, quickly recounted the events of the battle with the Northern Tribes with a smile. When old General Yuan Pei heard that the Northern Tribe's army had been completely annihilated and that Hellion Jun had been killed, tears streamed down his face as he repeatedly expressed his gratitude. Marquis Nin nodded and laughed. Once this news is out, the morale of our Mahist army will definitely be boosted. Now that the Prince and Princess Consort are back, why should we fear the Shilling army? Mo Xiaoyao nodded in satisfaction. That's great. However, Mo Jingli had already led 800,000 Chu state troops to the north. I wonder which general is going to meet the enemy? The hall fell silent. A trace of hesitation flashed across Murong Shun and Marquis Nan's faces. Even though they had already surrendered to the Mahist army, they were still once subjects of the Dechu state. Furthermore, no matter if it was the Mahist army soldiers or the Dechu state soldiers, they were all once subjects of the Dechu state. Killing each other was not as satisfying as fighting an enemy. Mo Xiaoyao glanced at the two's expressions and understood. He did not force them. If these two did not have any hesitation about the Dechu state troops, he would be worried. He turned to look at Yi Li and asked, What does Miss Li think we should do? Yi Li thought for a moment and said, Why not let General Lu Jingxian lead 400,000 troops? Lu Jingxian and Zhang Qilan were known as the two pillars of the Mahist army. Whether it was ability or prestige, they were definitely capable of leading an area. If he was really used as a fierce general, it would be a waste of talent. Even though Lu Jingxian was not present, he would not have any objections to Mo Xiuyao's orders. Yuan Pei said with some worry, "Is 800,000 too little?" Yili shook her head and smiled. Even though General Lu only has 400,000 troops, the Chu capital still has General Leng Huai leading 200,000 troops. Even though it is not enough to compare to the Chu stage troops, the Maoist army is definitely stronger than the Chu stage troops in terms of combat strength. General Lu is skilled at using troops. He will not lose to the Chu stage troops. Hearing Yili say this, Mo Xiuyao thought for a moment before nodding. Let's do as Miss Li says. After finishing the discussion, Mo Xiuyao and Yili brought the sleepy Mo Xiaobao back to the room prepared by Fei Hongwan to rest. Seeing Mo Xiaobao fall asleep, Mo Xiuyao pulled Yili to the side and asked with a smile, "Miss Li, what do you want to say?" Yili hesitated for a moment before nodding. I plan to follow General Lu to the Chu state's front lines. She originally thought that Mo Xiuyao would refuse. Unexpectedly, Mo Xiuyao only thought for a moment before nodding. That's fine. However, Miss Li, you must be careful. Seeing her clearly shocked expression, Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly. He lowered his head and touched her forehead. Miss Li, did you think I wouldn't agree? Yili raised her eyebrows. In the past, every time they wanted to go out, they had to haggle for a long time. Wasn't it obvious? Mo Xiuyao was in a good mood as he pulled her into his embrace. I have a feeling that after this time, Miss Li will not be able to leave Ai's side. So, if Miss Li wants to go, then go. Mo Xiuyao understood that after this time, the world situation would not change for at least the next 20 years. As for 20 years later, that was none of his business. Yili nodded and said with a faint smile, "Since it's like this, then I'll thank Prince." Mo Xiuyao gently rubbed her black hair and said with a smile, "After this time, we won't have to fight anymore. Miss Li will no longer have a reason to leave Ai and run around by herself. But don't worry, wherever Miss Li wants to go, I will accompany Miss Li." Yili gently leaned into his embrace. Her heart was as warm as water. In the blink of an eye, 11 or 12 years had passed. In the beginning, they only wanted to spend their days together. Later on, they wanted to help each other in times of need. The two of them had already been together for more than 10 years. They already had 3 children, but they had also realized that they could only be together for the rest of their lives. In the beginning, this was something that Yi Li did not even think about. "Xiuyao, when Xi and Lin grow up, let's go sightseeing, okay?" Leaning into Mo Xiuyao's embrace, Yili asked softly. Mo Xiuyao nodded and said with a smile, "The things that Miss Li likes, I will do with you." But in his heart, he did not approve of Xi and Lin growing up. When Mo Xiaobao grew up, it would be fine. Wasn't an older brother used to take care of his younger siblings? Otherwise, what was the use of having him? So, in his father's eyes, the poor Mo Xiaobao was not only a candidate to clean up the mess, but also a nanny for his 2 younger siblings in the future. The next morning, Yili quietly left Fei Hong Pass and went to Lu Jinxian's camp. The generals in Fei Hong Pass did not care when they found that their princess had disappeared. They were already used to their princess disappearing from time to time to do some important things. Only Mo Xiaobao was unhappy, because after his mother left, his father began to squeeze him even more. Northern tribes on the snowy plains of the land of ice and snow. The royal house of the northern tribes stood in the depths of the snowy plains. Different from the resplendent Chu capital and the emperor of Shiling's city, the royal house of the northern tribes was much more simple and crude. It was like a city made of stone. Although this was the most prosperous place in the northern tribes, only the royal house of the northern tribes lived in the city. Ordinary people still lived in their own tents. So, the entire royal house of the northern tribes was not even as big as the Chu capital's imperial palace. Chapter 956. The weather in the northern tribes was terrible. Every year, there would be 3 to 4 months where snow would seal the borders. It was no wonder that the northern tribes yearned for the fertile land of the Dechu state. In the palace, the king of the northern tribes sat on a throne covered with tiger skin. He looked at the people below him angrily. The charcoal fire warmed up the entire room, but at this moment, it made it even hotter. The king of the northern tribes was already 60 years old. When he was young, he was a great hero of the grasslands. But as he got older, or perhaps it was because of the many things from the central plains that spread to the northern tribes, or perhaps it was human nature, the old king of the northern tribes gradually became muddle-headed and lustful. But even so, when he heard the news of Yeluye's death, he was furious. The crown prince of the northern tribes, Yelu Hong, was also complaining in his heart. He did not expect Imo Xiuyao to move so quickly and defeat the hundreds of thousands of northern tribe soldiers in one fell swoop. In these 3 years, in order to conquer the Dechu state, the northern tribes had sacrificed nearly 2 million soldiers. But what they managed to get back were some meaningless gold, silver, jewels, and antiques. There were many gold and silver mines in the grasslands. The northern tribes did not lack gold and silver. As for antiques, they did not know how to appreciate them. Needless to say, because they did not conquer the capital of the Dechu state, they did not manage to get their hands on any real treasures. To the northern tribes, these things were not worth as much as silk, tea leaves, and food. Yelu Hong chose to work with Mo Xiuyao only because he wanted to destroy his brother, Yelu Yi. He did not want to destroy the remaining hundreds of thousands of northern tribe soldiers. But now, looking at the letter in his hand, Yelu Hong felt a chill in his heart. But he could not say anything. He could not blame Mo Xiuyao for being too good at fighting and destroying the entire northern tribe's army. He could only blame Yelu Yi for being too useless. Crown Prince, the king of the northern tribes, panted. Yelu Hong hurriedly collected his thoughts and stepped forward, replying in a deep voice, "This son is here." The king of the northern tribes said, "Bring that woman from the Dechu state over to I." Yelu Hong was slightly startled, hesitating. Princess Ronghua had been with him for more than 10 years and had given birth to several children for him. Although they were from the Chu state, they still had some feelings for each other. What's more, the relationship between Princess Ronghua and Princess Ding was very good. Although she was set up by Mo Xiuyao this time, she didn't actually do anything, so she avoided the danger of being discovered by her father. Moreover, Mo Xiuyao had helped him kill Yelu Yi. If he let his father kill Princess Ronghua, he was afraid that it would be difficult to explain to the Prince Ding mansion. "Father, this has nothing to do with Ronghua," Yelu Hong said in a deep voice. The king of the northern tribes coldly snorted and said, "I don't care if she has anything to do with it. All I know is that Mo Xiuyao killed my son and I's million-strong army. I want to use that woman from the Chu state as a sacrifice and send troops to avenge my son." After that, he ignored Yelu Hong's reluctance and waved his hand to bring Princess Ronghua over. Yelu Hong frowned and said, "Father, Ronghua must be the mother of the princes. If we kill her, the princes, the king of the northern tribes, didn't care." He waved his hand and said, "What do a few children know? Give them to your other concubines to raise. If they can't be raised properly, just kill them. I don't lack little princes." The king of the northern tribes was indeed qualified to say this. Up to now, he had 13 princes, 7 princesses, and no less than 30 royal grandchildren. Naturally, he didn't care about the impure princes of a woman from the Chu state. Not long after, Princess Ronghua was escorted to the door of the room. The person who escorted Princess Ronghua pushed her without any mercy. Princess Ronghua staggered and fell into the room. Princess Ronghua couldn't help but smile faintly as she looked at the people who were glaring at her maliciously, and then looked at Yelu Hong's awkward expression. As a princess, she naturally understood that her life and death, honor and disgrace were related to the relationship between the two countries. As early as when West Hill attacked the Chu state, the northern tribes didn't kill her because of the people sent by the Prince Ding mansion to help her. Now that millions of troops of the northern tribes were destroyed by the Mahist army, the king of the northern tribes couldn't find anyone to vent his anger on, so the first person he thought of was naturally herself. Ronghua greets the king and the crown prince. Princess Ronghua bowed slightly and saluted the king of the northern tribes with the etiquette of the northern tribes. Even so, she still had the nobility and elegance of a well-educated royal woman, which was completely different from the rudeness of the northern tribes' women. The king of the northern tribes sneered and said, "Princess of the Chu state, do you know what happened?" Princess Ronghua raised her eyebrows and smiled faintly. "Ronghua doesn't know. Please enlighten me." The king of the northern tribe's face was a bit ferocious, but no one knew if he was worried about his son, Yalu Yi, or the millions of troops of the northern tribes. "You don't know. I's seventh prince was killed by Mo Xiaoyao. Don't you know?" In fact, Princess Ronghua was a woman and a member of a different race, so it was normal that she didn't know. It was just that the king of the northern tribes deliberately found fault with her, so no one could think of anything. Princess Ronghua lowered her eyes and didn't speak. She already understood that the king of the northern tribes wanted to kill her, so anything she said would be superfluous. Although she had been married to the northern tribes for more than 10 years, and although the Chu state only had half of its territory left, she was not afraid to beg for mercy and disgrace the dignity of a princess of the Chu state. "It seems that you also know that you should die. I will leave your body intact and send it back to the Chu state." The king of the northern tribes sneered. Princess Ronghua looked at Yelu Hong on the side. Yelu Hong looked at her awkwardly, but didn't say anything. Seeing this, Princess Ronghua could only smile bitterly. These years, although she had some disloyalty, she was really sincere to Yelu Hong. She also knew that Yelu Hong had her in his heart, but it was not as important as his position as the crown prince and his royal power. But seeing that Yelu Hong didn't even say a word for her, she couldn't help but feel disappointed. Princess Ronghua couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. When Princess Ronghua stopped talking, the king of the northern tribes thought that she was afraid. The anger in his heart dissipated a lot, and he said proudly, "I want to drag her out and behead her." "Yes, your majesty." Two northern tribes guards stepped forward, one on the left and one on the right, and pulled Princess Ronghua out. Princess Ronghua closed her eyes, looked sideways at Yelu Hong, and said, "Your majesty, please take good care of my children." Without waiting for Yelu Hong to agree, Princess Ronghua glanced at the two guards beside her and said proudly, "Let go. I can walk on my own." Princess Ronghua walked out calmly, and when she was about to step out of the door, a low male voice sounded from inside. "Wait." Chapter 9:57. Wait. Suddenly, Yelu Hong stood up and said, "Crown Prince." The king of the northern tribes was furious. The more incompetent and self-opinionated a person was, the more they could not stand the opposing opinions of others. Moreover, the king of the northern tribes was furious. Seeing that Yelu Hong dared to refute him for a woman from the Chu state, he was furious. His gaze towards Yelu Hong was filled with killing intent. Yelu Hong lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, "Father, please listen to me. Princess Ronghua cannot be killed." At the door, Princess Ronghua was stunned when she heard Yelu Hong's voice. She turned to look at Yelu Hong. Her beautiful eyes moved. She had already given up, but she did not expect Yelu Hong to speak up for her. The king of the northern tribes was so angry that he laughed. He stared at Yelu Hong and said, "Cannot be killed? How come I do not know that there is anyone in the northern tribes that I cannot kill?" Yelu Hong said in a low voice, "I know that seventh brother died on the battlefield, and father must be very sad. But father, please think of the northern tribes." The king of the northern tribes narrowed his eyes and sneered at Yelu Hong. "You mean that if I kill this woman, it will affect the northern tribes?" Yelu Hong said seriously, "Ronghua is Princess Ding's sworn sister. She has a very good relationship with Princess Ding. Everyone knows that Ding Wang dotes on Wang Fei. If Fu Wang kills Ding Wang Fei's sworn sister, I'm afraid that in Ding Wang Fei's anger, he will harm our northern tribes. Princess Ronghua and Yili being sworn sisters was naturally made up by Yelu Hong. Since the Dechu state was far away from the royal house of the northern tribes, the king of the northern tribes could not send people to verify it. The reason why Yelu Hong said this was because in the northern tribes, the relationship between sworn siblings was very important. The relationship between sworn siblings was not inferior to that of family. The king of the northern tribes snorted, "Harm the northern tribes. I am about to take revenge for ye." Yelu Hong looked up at the king of the northern tribes and said firmly, "Father, now, does the northern tribes have any soldiers to mobilize? How is father going to avenge seventh brother?" The northern tribes had a vast territory, but sparsely populated. A 2 million strong army could be said to be the strength of a country. In the next 20 to 30 years, the northern tribes would not be able to fight a war. At this point, Yelu Hong finally understood Mo Xiaoyao's intention. Mo Xiaoyao wanted to deal with Genom of Gojoseon of Xiling and Mo Jingli of Dechu State. From the start, he would not give the northern tribes a chance to recover. By the time the northern tribes recovered, the Prince Ding mansion would have already ruled the world. For some reason, even though the situation in the Central Plains was still unclear, Yelu Hong never doubted that the Prince Ding mansion would be the final winner. "Father, for the sake of the northern tribes, please calm your anger for now." Killing Princess Ronghua could only vent his anger, but she was the princess of the Chu state, not the princess of the Prince Ding mansion. Even if his father wanted to vent his anger, it would be extremely limited. Why not exchange her for something of value? In fact, the king of the northern tribes knew that the current northern tribes did not have the ability to compete with the Mahist army. He clamored for the cavalry to avenge Princess Ronghua because he was angry. Yelu Hong's words gave him a way out, so he took advantage of it. He looked at Yelu Hong and asked, "Something of value? What value can a woman have?" Yelu Hong pondered for a moment and said, "We can exchange Princess Ronghua and the Mahist army for the remains of seventh brother and the northern tribe soldiers. These soldiers died on the battlefield for the northern tribes. If we can bring their remains back to the grassland, it may be a comfort for the people of the northern tribes." The king of the northern tribes lowered his head and pondered. Although he was muddle-headed, he was not an idiot who did not know anything. When he was young, he was wise and powerful. Naturally, he understood what Yelu Hong's words meant, and he only needed to exchange a dispensable woman. It was indeed a very cost-effective thing. He looked up and glanced at Princess Ronghua at the door and asked, "Will the Prince Ding mansion agree?" Yelu Hong nodded and said, "Not to mention the friendship between Princess Ronghua and Princess Ding. Princess Ronghua came to the northern tribes for the marriage of the Chu state. Although the Prince Ding mansion is in power now, the people of the Prince Ding mansion were once the people of the Chu state. If the Prince Ding mansion does not care about Princess Ronghua's life, it will inevitably cause dissatisfaction and discussion among the people of the Chu state." The king of the northern tribes nodded irritably and waved his hand. "I will leave this matter to you. In short, I do not want to see this woman in the northern tribes again. You can all leave." Yelu Hong nodded and accepted the order. He thought for a moment and asked, "Father, what about seventh brother's funeral?" "It's up to you." Years of strong wine and beautiful women had made the king of the northern tribe's body a little weak. After a bout of anger, he felt a little tired and impatiently said. Yelu Hong responded and left. When he walked to the door, he looked back and glanced at the man who was holding a girl of the northern tribes. His lips showed a trace of a mocking smile. It turned out that the death of seventh brother was just a bout of anger for his father. Back in the Crown Prince's mansion, Princess Ronghua was escorted back to her room to pack her things. Even her son was not allowed to see her again. Princess Ronghua packed up the service of the Dechu state for several years. Looking at the room where she had lived for more than 10 years, she could not help but burst into tears. "Princess, the Crown Prince saved you." In the room, a woman who looked like a maid said in a low voice. Princess Ronghua raised her head and looked at the person who came. This was the person sent by the Prince Ding mansion to protect her safety and help her. After these years of getting along, Princess Ronghua also had some trust in her. She wiped her tears and nodded with a wry smile. I know. He was willing to speak up and save my life. I should be satisfied. The woman did not speak anymore. She just calmly looked at Princess Ronghua with a touch of faint warmth. One was the princess of the Dechu state. The other was the crown prince of the northern tribes. It was already very good that Princess Ronghua could have such an ending between the two hostile countries. Princess, don't worry. Go back to the Dechu state and start a new life. After a long time, the woman whispered. Princess Ronghua smiled faintly and nodded. Yes, I haven't been back to the Chu capital for a long time. I don't know if it's still the same as before. She knew that she was able to return to the Dechu state with her life, because Yelu Hong was not too cruel. She also had the help of the Prince Ding mansion. Although she was reluctant to part with the child, neither the king of the northern tribes nor Yelu Hong would allow her to take the child away. She only hoped that the mother and son would meet again in this life. In a tent in the military camp of the Dechu state, Yaoji sat peacefully in the tent, casually flipping through a book. Beside her, Mulai was also holding a book, but he was reading it very seriously. Yaoji leaned lazily on the soft couch, her eyes calm and distant. In order to get Mu Yang to bring her and Mu Lai to the military camp, Yaoji put in a lot of effort. Fortunately, the rules of the military camp of the Dechu state were not as strict as those of the Mahist army. What's more, with the precedent of Princess Ding accompanying Prince Ding in and out of the military camp, it was much easier to make an exception. Although she did not have the ability to strategize like Princess Ding, as long as she could persuade Prince Li, would that be enough? And it did not seem difficult to persuade Mo Jingli. Thinking of the beautiful women in Prince Li's tent, Yaoji smiled faintly. Chapter 958. Mulai glanced sideways at Yaoji, who was smiling faintly and thinking about something. He raised his eyebrows and asked, Mother, what are you smiling about? Yaoji raised her eyebrows and smiled. You're getting used to it. Mulai raised his chin and said proudly, I've never been used to it. Aren't you my mother? Yaoji smiled and hugged Mulai. She raised her hand and rubbed his little head. Isn't that so? I'm your mother. Perhaps it was because he started practicing martial arts too early and hurt his muscles and bones. Although Mulai was already 11 or 12 years old, he still looked like a 7 or 8-year-old child. The two of them got along over the years and developed some feelings for each other. Thus, Mulai recognized Yaoji as his adoptive mother. Yaoji truly loved Mulai. Moreover, this child had made great contributions to the Prince Ding mansion at such a young age. His future was bound to be limitless. Yaoji was naturally happy that Mulai was still willing to recognize her as his adoptive mother despite knowing her identity. She loved Mulai even more. Mulai chuckled at her. Yaoji couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. She heard Mulai say slowly, I forgot to tell Mother that I also recognized Commander Qin as my adoptive father a few days ago. The smile on Yaoji's face froze. She looked at Mulai's happy face and was speechless for a long time. As if he didn't see Yaoji's expression, Mulai leaned back in his chair and said with a smile, We'll be home soon. Don't you plan on what to do with my adoptive father after we return? It was originally nothing much. Mulai would each recognize an adoptive father and adoptive mother. However, when it was mentioned together, she couldn't help but blush. She rolled her eyes at Mulai helplessly. You're just a child. Why are you poking your nose into other people's business? Mulai smiled. Other people's business? I only have one adoptive mother and one adoptive father. I don't want to go back and recognize another adoptive mother or adoptive father. Adoptive mother, don't you agree? Yaoji raised her hand and placed the book in her hand on Mulai's face. Don't talk nonsense. Be careful and don't get carried away. If you fail miserably at the end, you'll be laughed at. Mulai rubbed his nose. He understood that Yaoji was right. The closer it was to the end, the more he had to be more careful. General Mu, a guard's voice came from outside the tent. Mulai and Yaoji looked at each other and stood up. Mu Yang had already walked in from outside. When he saw the book in Mulai's hand, he couldn't help but smile. He reached out and patted Mulai's shoulder. Lai, is hard-working, but you don't have to work too hard. Mu Lai nodded silently and rolled his eyes in his heart. To be honest, this cheap father of his had treated him quite well. Unfortunately, who told the Mu family to offend His Highness Prince Ding? If Mu Yang and old Marquis Mu Yang knew that the grandson of the Mu family that they had doted on for several years was just a fake and a spy at that, who knows how angry they would be. Thinking of this, Mu Lai looked at Mu Yang with some sympathy. Mu Yang naturally couldn't understand the meaning of this glance. He thought that his son was just worried about his homework. He smiled and said, "Silly child, what you have learned is already much more than the average 8 or 9-year-old child. You don't have to force yourself too much." Mu Lai's little face instantly darkened. Of course, he had learned more than an 8 or 9-year-old child because he was not an 8 or 9-year-old child himself. Although it was very convenient to go out on missions, his height that didn't grow much in the past few years was an untouchable pain in Mu Lai's heart. The weather was cold. It was better to let Mu Yang and the house of Marquis Mu Yang die. Mu Yang sat down on the chair beside the soft couch. Yaoji poured a cup of hot tea for him from the table and asked with a smile, "Why are you still free to come over at this time?" The army had just arrived at the front line not far from the Mahist army. These days, Mu Yang and old Marquis Mu Yang had been busy with military affairs with Mo Jingli. Although Yaoji and Mu Lai came to the army with Mu Yang, they hadn't seen each other for a few days. Mu Yang said, "The Mahist army is led by Prince Ding and has wiped out the Northern Tribes army. Now Prince Ding has returned to Feihong Pass to confront Lei Jinting. Lu Jinxian's army is also moving to the front line. I'm afraid I don't have time to take care of you these days. Now that I'm free, I'll come back to take a look." Yaoji smiled sweetly and said, "I'll take good care of Lai. You don't have to worry about us." Mu Yang nodded, holding Yaoji's hand, and smiled. "That's good. It's been hard for you to follow us all the way." Yaoji lowered her eyes and smiled faintly. "It's what I should do. There's no need to say it's not hard." Mu Yang looked at Yaoji's gentle and beautiful face. A trace of relief and tenderness flashed in his eyes. Holding Yaoji's hand, he nodded and said, "That's good. I'll go back first. Take good care of yourselves." Yaoji and Mu Lai stood up to send Mu Yang out, then turned back to sit down. Mu Lai frowned and said, "Mu Yang won't come back. We can't just walk around outside. How can we get the information of Mo Jingli's army's deployment and defense?" Yaoji smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. When the time comes, we'll try to get in touch with General Liu." Mu Lai nodded. Wang Fei didn't ask them to get the Dechu State's defensive deployment map. She probably had something more important to tell them. They only needed to wait for news and, when necessary, provide some assistance to the Mahist army. In a large tent of the Dechu State's army, because the emperor was personally leading the army, the size of the tent was completely different from that of a normal commander's tent. It was much more spacious and magnificent. Even though the weather in the north was still bitterly cold, the thick carpet from the western regions was spread out and the fine silver charcoal burned quietly. The entire tent was warm and comfortable. But Mo Jingli's expression did not become amiable because of the warmth and comfort of the tent. Instead, it became even more sinister. The generals below all bowed their heads in fear, not daring to look at the high and mighty emperor. The matter of the emperor's descent did not improve Mo Jingli's mood. Ever since that night at the Li Wang Fu last year, Mo Jingli's cold aura was enough to make anyone retreat. Those who did not know did not dare to ask, and the few who knew did not dare to ask. People only knew that the young emperor had suddenly fallen ill and died, and then King Li ascended the throne. Everything happened so quickly that many people did not have time to react before King Li ascended the throne with absolute power. But after ascending the throne, Mo Jingli's temper became even colder and stranger than before, and his mood was unpredictable. As a monarch who had just ascended the throne, Mo Jingli was the first to personally lead the army instead of comforting the court and the people. The northern militant army has been defeated, so Mo Xiuyao's attention will definitely be on the southern front. Now, Mo Xiaoyao has sent Lu Jingxian to lead 400,000 soldiers to face the Chu State's army. What do you all think? Mo Jingli asked in a low voice. The generals all looked at each other, and no one dared to speak. Not only had the northern militant army been defeated, they had been completely annihilated. This caused the Mahist army generals to feel a chill in their hearts. Furthermore, the Chu State and the Xiling Alliance had taken advantage of the battle between the Mahist army and the northern militant army to send out their own troops. The Xiling Alliance and the Mahist army were pure enemies, so naturally, they would use all means possible. But the Chu State and the Mahist army were still connected. King Li's actions would inevitably cause the people and soldiers to feel a chill in their hearts. Chapter 959. What? None of you have anything to say? Mo Jingli narrowed his eyes and said coldly, Your Majesty has his own decision. We will listen to your Majesty's orders. All the generals said in unison. Mo Jingli snorted. How could he not know what these people were thinking? He glanced at them and then looked behind old Marquis Muyang. He said in a low voice, Old Marquis Muyang, what do you think? Old Marquis Muyang quickly stepped forward and reported respectfully, Your Majesty, I think that if it's just Lu Jinxian's 400,000 troops, there's nothing to worry about. But what? Mo Jingli asked. Old Marquis Muyang said, But there's still Leng Huai's 200,000 troops in the Chu capital. Leng Huai himself is also a rare talent. When the Northern Region's army was pressing on the border, Leng Huai guarded Zijing Pass alone for several months and prevented the Northern Region's million troops from taking a step past Zijing Pass. From this, it can be seen that this person cannot be underestimated. Other than that, this official thinks that one of Prince Ding and Princess Ding might come over. At that time, Leng Huai, Mo Xiaoyao Yili? Mo Jingli played with the jade thumb ring in his hand and snorted. Leng Huai is deeply indebted to the emperor, but he betrayed the country and joined the Prince Ding mansion. He deserves to be beheaded for his crimes. As for the Prince Ding mansion, I'm afraid it's Yi Li who will come this time. She came at the right time. Hearing Mo Jingli's words, all the generals silently criticized in their hearts. Leng Huai guarded Zijing Pass alone. Not only did King Li not give any help, but he also embezzled Leng Huai's provisions. In the end, he even took away the provisions that should have been given to Leng Huai by Yuan Bao. If it wasn't for the Mahist army, Leng Huai's grave would be covered with tall grass. How could he say that he had received the emperor's favor? Moreover, in order to protect the Chu capital, Leng Huai had lost a son. Mo Jingli's words were not very convincing. However, Mo Jingli was the emperor. Naturally, he had the final say. None of the generals dared to refute him. He just silently listened to his orders. Mo Jingli was displeased. He waved his hand and said lightly, Senior Marquis Muyang, I'll leave Lu Jingxian to you. As for Princess Ding, I will personally deal with her. Muyang and his son hurriedly cupped their hands and accepted the order. This general obeys. Reporting to your Majesty, Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon of West Hill requests an audience. A soldier reported loudly outside the door. Mo Jingli frowned slightly. Lei Tingfeng, what's he doing here? The soldier replied, Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon only said that he was ordered by Genom of Gojoseon to have an important matter to discuss with your Majesty. Let him in, Mo Jingli ordered. After a while, Lei Tingfeng was brought in. He looked at the generals in the tent and Mo Jingli, who was sitting high on the dragon throne. He smiled faintly and bowed. This one is Lei Tingfeng. Greetings to Emperor Chu. Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon, please rise. Mo Jingli narrowed his eyes and sized up Lei Tingfeng in front of him. The current Lei Tingfeng was clearly much calmer than when he first met him in Nanzhao. Even though he was facing Mo Jingli, who had already become the emperor of the Chu state, he was still neither servile nor overbearing. He was calm and composed. Even rarer was that his gaze had become extremely calm and steady. This was something that Lei Tingfeng did not have back then. Mo Jingli stared at Lei Tingfeng. After a while, he asked leisurely, Crown Prince Jinim of Gojoseon of West Hill, what brings you here? Lei Tingfeng smiled faintly. Replying to Emperor Chu, Father heard that Emperor Chu has already led his troops to the front lines. He specially ordered Tingfeng to come and welcome you. Hearing this, the old generals present couldn't help but look at Lei Tingfeng with some praise. Back when Prince Ding was getting married, Lei Tingfeng, as the crown prince of Jinim of Gojoseon, had come to the Chu capital to attend the wedding. Although he was not arrogant, it was inevitable that people would feel that he was somewhat arrogant. But the current Lei Tingfeng was not only much calmer than 10 years ago, his mentality was also much more peaceful. Jinim of Gojoseon definitely did not order him to welcome Mo Jingli, but it was rare that he could lower his head. Obviously, Lei Tingfeng's words made Mo Jingli's mood somewhat better. His gaze toward Lei Tingfeng also became somewhat warmer. Mo Jingli nodded and smiled. Jinim of Gojoseon is too polite. Crown Prince, please sit. Many thanks to Emperor Chu. Lei Tingfeng spoke and smiled naturally. There was no trace of dissatisfaction or awkwardness due to the fact that someone he looked down on in the past was now higher than him. After giving his thanks, Lei Tingfeng sat down at the head of the table. After the guards served tea and left, Mo Jingli also dismissed the generals, leaving behind Marquis Muyang, his son, and a few of his trusted generals. Mo Jingli then asked, I heard that Crown Prince of Jinim of Gojoseon conquered Wei City in one fell swoop. I have yet to congratulate Crown Prince. Lei Tingfeng smiled. This one was just lucky. A few days ago, I was trapped by Marquis Nan and General Murong and almost lost my life. If it wasn't for Father's thorough arrangements, Lei Tingfeng would have already ceased to exist. This one does not dare to take the credit. Mo Jingli smiled faintly and didn't say much. Crown Prince, what instructions does Jinim of Gojoseon have for you? Lei Tingfeng said, Father instructed this one to listen to Emperor Chu's instructions. It's just that, on the way here, this one received news that Princess Ding and Yili have already joined Lu Jinxin's army. I'm afraid that they will arrive at the front lines at the same time as Lu Jinxian. This time, the Maoist army is being led by Yi Li. Mo Jingli asked with a frown. Lei Tingfeng shook his head. No, according to this one's knowledge, Princess Ding is the military advisor. Mo Jingli laughed coldly. She really knows when to yield and when not. Many thanks for the news, Crown Prince. This one understands. Lei Tingfeng frowned slightly. Does Prince Li have any countermeasures? Mo Jingli smiled. Crown Prince doesn't need to worry. I have my own countermeasures. Crown Prince only needs to wait and see. Seeing that Mo Jingli had no intention to say more, Lei Tingfeng didn't continue. He smiled faintly and said, If that's the case, then this one will respectfully await the good news. Mo Jingli smiled proudly. Naturally, seeing Mo Jingli's arrogant appearance in his bright yellow dragon robe, Lei Tingfeng looked down indifferently, and his lips curved into an imperceptible sneer. Chapter 960. On the official road in winter, the Maoist army was like a black dragon advancing quickly along the official road. The two people at the front were the commander-in-chief, Lu Jinxian, and Yi Li, who was dressed in white and had a white cloak draped over her shoulders. Because Lu Jinxian was the commander-in-chief and Yi Li was only a strategist, the two of them rode side by side. This was to show Wang Fei's respect for the commander-in-chief, Lu Jinxian. Following behind the two of them were Zhuo Jing, Lin Han, Yin Ting, and Su Qingfeng. Lu Jinxian looked sideways at Yi Li and smiled. Wang Fei, I'm afraid that Mo Jingli has already gathered his troops and is waiting for us ahead. Yin Ting curled his lips and said, Mo Jingli has just ascended the throne. Isn't he waiting to take down the Maoist army's spirit? But I don't know who will take down whose spirit when the time comes. Lin Han said with a righteous expression. When the others heard this, they couldn't help but laugh. Speaking of which, Mo Jingli really didn't have any outstanding military achievements. If he wanted to take down the Maoist army spirit, he could do it from other places. On the battlefield, No one thought highly of Mo Jingli. Yili smiled. It's good to have confidence, but don't let your guard down. Even though Mo Jingli didn't have any outstanding military achievements, it didn't mean that there weren't any capable people in the Chu State's army. Lu Jingxian nodded. Wang Fei is right. Even though Marquis Muyang's character is somewhat questionable, his ability to lead an army and fight is indeed extraordinary. Marquis Muyang had been conferred the title of Marquis because of his military achievements. Back then, he had also fought on the battlefield. Speaking of which, when Marquis Muyang had dominated the battlefield, Lu Jingxian hadn't yet become famous. As they spoke, Lu Jingxian pulled on the reins and looked at the road ahead with a slight frown. Yili asked in a low voice, "General Lu, what's wrong?" Lu Jingxian said in a low voice, "We're about to leave the official road and turn into a mountain path. If I were the one leading the troops, there would definitely be an ambush ahead." Yili sized up the narrow path in front of her and asked in a deep voice, "General, are you sure?" Lu Jingxian nodded silently. Yili thought for a moment before looking at Lu Jingxian and saying, "General Lu is our army's commander-in-chief, so General Lu is our leader." Lu Jingxian understood that the princess consort trusted him. She nodded and said, "Thank you, princess. Order the entire army to set up camp nearby." As the commander-in-chief, he was worried that he would be held back by others and be in a difficult position. However, even though Yi Li was the military advisor, her status was far above Lu Jingxian's. This also caused Lu Jingxian to report to Yi Li about everything. Many times, it would cause an unavoidable and severe impact. Yi Li's words were to tell Lu Jingxian that he was the current commander-in-chief of the Mahist army, and that he could make all the decisions himself. Since Yi Li was the military advisor, she naturally had the responsibility to act as the military advisor. The Mahist army had strict discipline. Even though the order came very suddenly, it didn't cause any chaos. After a while, the entire army set up camp not far from the official road and prepared to reorganize the troops. In the large tent, Yun Ting took a step forward and said in a deep voice, reporting to the great general, "This general is willing to be the vanguard and scout ahead." Lu Jingxian smiled faintly and waved his hand, saying, "General Yun, don't be impatient." On the side, Zhuo Jing smiled and said, "General Yun, can't you see that Commander Su isn't here?" Yun Ting finally realized that Su Qingfeng, who had been with him the entire time, had disappeared without a trace. Su Qingfeng was Qi Lin's detachment commander. Since he was here, it meant that Qi Lin was also here. It was much more convenient and safer to have Qi Lin scout ahead than to have him scout ahead. Only then did Yun Ting sit down, somewhat embarrassedly. Lu Jingxian looked at Yun Ting with a smile and said, "General Yun's bravery is a good thing. It seems that after so many years, our Mahist army has gained a few more great generals." It wasn't easy to find a great general who could truly command the three armies. Even in the Mahist army, which was famous for its bravery, only Lu Jingxian and Zhang Qilan could truly be called a great general. Unfortunately, the two of them had been silent for many years when the Mahist army was being suppressed and had missed the best time. Otherwise, their reputations wouldn't have been limited to where they were now. Now, Yun Ting, Hisu, Chun Yun, Sun Yaowu, Zhou Min, and Fu Zhao under the Mahist army were still young, but they all had a bright future ahead of them. For example, Yun Ting wasn't even 30 years old. In terms of military achievements, he was already one of the top generals of the younger generation. He was a rising star general in the future. Yun Ting was slightly embarrassed by Lu Jingxian's praise. He rubbed his head and looked at Yi Li. Yi Li smiled and said, "It is a good thing to bravely advance, but as a general, you need to change your temper." "Many thanks for Wang Fei's teachings," Yun Ting said embarrassedly. He knew that his greatest weakness was that he occasionally acted impulsively. Because he was young and his personality, he didn't give people the feeling that he was as steady and reliable as Chun Yun and the others. This made Yun Ting feel very helpless. Every time he wanted to change, there was a saying that it was easy to change mountains and rivers, but hard to change one's nature. How could one's personality be so easily changed? Yili didn't force this. Yinting was still young. Even though he was occasionally impulsive, he wasn't reckless. When he was a few years older and experienced more things, he would naturally become more steady. Lu Jingxian smiled and said, Wang Fei is too strict with General Yun. This old man has had nothing to do these years and has written down some of my thoughts. If General Yun doesn't mind, you could take a look. Hearing this, Yinting couldn't help but pause. It had to be known that the thoughts and experiences of a general, especially a famous general, were treasures that couldn't be bought with money. Other than father, son, master, and disciple, no one else could read them. Seeing Yun Ting in a daze, Yili coughed softly and bowed respectfully to Lu Jingxian. She said, Yun Ting. Yun Ting finally came back to his senses. He was overjoyed and hurriedly said, Many thanks to General Lu. Yun Ting will definitely study seriously and not disappoint General's expectations. Lu Jingxian laughed brightly and stood to help Yun Ting up. He said, General Yun is too polite. To the side, Zhuo Jing looked at the two and said with a smile, General Lu and General Yun hit it off so well. Why don't you accept General Yun as your student? Before Lu Jingxian could speak, Yun Ting had already knelt to Lu Jingxian. This student greets master and begs for master's guidance. Lu Jingxian paused and tilted his head to look at Yili. Lu Jingxian was already over 40 years old. Although he had a son, his son was not like his father. He liked literature and did not like martial arts. Now, his son was studying at Lishan Academy. Lu Jingxian was naturally willing to accept Yun Ting, a rising star of the Mahist army, as his disciple and pass on his life's knowledge and experience. Just the fact that he and Yun Ting, Ding Wang Fei's trusted aide and confidant, had become master and disciple was enough to make LV Jin Xian happy. Not to mention that Yun Ting was someone who was very capable. However, Yun Ting was Princess Ding's trusted aide. Naturally, he had to consider Yi Li's opinion. Yi Li smiled and said, Could it be that General Lu dislikes Yun Ting's lack of talent and is unwilling to accept him? Only then did Lu Jingxian relax and smile happily. He bent over to help Yun Ting up and said with a smile, Yun Ting does not need to be so courteous. Yun Ting understood that Lu Jingxian had agreed and was immediately overjoyed. Many thanks, master. Chapter 9:61. Lu Jingxian had a new disciple and was very happy inside, but he still urged, do things according to the rules in the army. Yun Ting nodded and said, Yes, thank you, Great General. Great General, Commander Su requests an audience. A guard reported from outside the door. Everyone's expressions became alert. Lu Jingxian hurriedly said, Invite Commander Su in. Su Qingfeng walked in wearing green and yellow clothing. Yun Ting curiously examined Su Qingfeng and said, Third young master, what clothing are you wearing? It was not that Yun Ting had not seen much, but that the Mahist army always wore black clothing and gave people a feeling of mystery and power. At this time, Su Qingfeng's clothing did not match Qi Lin's presence. Su Qingfeng rolled his eyes at him and said, Do I have to wear night clothing to scout the way? Night clothes were naturally a good thing, but wearing black clothes in broad daylight was clearly asking for trouble. Lu Jingxian asked in a deep voice, Have you found anything? Su Qingfeng nodded and said, Great General's guess is correct. There are no birds on the mountain path, and no people. But there are traces of large amounts of troops passing through the mountain, and this subordinate smells a faint scent of tung oil. Speaking of this, Su Qingfeng couldn't help but frown. Tung oil. Lu Jingxian frowned and looked at Yi Li, saying, Wang Fei, I'm afraid we cannot take this shortcut. Regardless of whether the Chu army planned to burn the mountain or not, the Mahist army could not take the risk. As the saying went, fire and water were merciless. Right now, it was winter and all living things were dying. With the help of tung oil, no matter how well prepared they were, once they entered the mountain path, the Chu army would not be able to escape. Moreover, with Lu Jinxian's understanding of Mo Jingli, In order to eliminate the Mahist army, Emo Jingli wouldn't care if he had to burn down a few mountains. Yili nodded. Lin Han took out a huge map and spread it out on the table beside them. Lu Jingxian stepped forward and looked at the map in front of him. If we avoid this road and take a detour, I'm afraid we'll be delayed for a few days. This time, the Chu army used an open strategy. They didn't hide the fact that there was an ambush ahead. Advance. The Chu army ignited the fire. If they didn't advance, the Chu army would have more time to seize more territory and occupy more advantageous terrain. Yili frowned as she looked at the map. What are General Lu's plans? Lu Jingxian thought and rubbed the map in his hand. A beat later, he said, Wang Fei, please help. Yili smiled and said, You and I are one family. Right now, General is the commander of the army. If there is anything, General can give orders. Lu Jingxian nodded and didn't hold back. He said in a deep voice, Wang Fei, please take Yin Ting and lead the 200,000 Mahist army to take a detour. Yili raised her head to look at Lu Jingxian and said, General Lu still wants to take the small path? This path was short, but it was filled with danger. The Dechu State soldiers didn't even need to do anything. They just needed to ignite the tung oil buried in the mountain path, and it would be enough to destroy the Mahist army. 200,000 soldiers, not 2,000. If the path was set on fire, less than 20% would be able to escape. Lu Jingxian's gaze was leisurely as he said lightly, This one remembers that there is another path that can pass through here, but it will take some effort. Wang Fei, please take the people first. If it doesn't work, this one will lead the army and come from behind. Yili stared at the map for a while. Of course, she understood that there were some places that even Qi Lin, who had undergone professional training, might not be able to map out completely. Also, the map was really small and might not be able to show some of the more hidden places. She only asked, Where does General Lu plan on coming out? Lu Jingxian pointed at a place on the map. Yili thought for a moment and then nodded and said, All right, Ben Fei will definitely be able to reach this place within 7 days. When the time comes, Ben Fei and the general will attack from the left and right. We can attack the Mahist army station here. What does the general think? Lu Jingxian looked carefully and couldn't help but smile. He clapped his hands and said, Wang Fei's good eyes. Yili smiled slightly and said, Leave Commander Su and Qi Lin behind for General Lu. Yili also understood that Lu Jingxian's path wouldn't be smooth. So leaving Su Qingfeng and Qi Lin behind for him was a form of insurance. Lu Jingxian understood Yi Li's good intentions and was very moved. He quickly refused. No, Qi Lin should still be by Wang Fei's side. Yili shook her head and said, General doesn't need to worry. Qingfeng has already reached the north. He will naturally make the proper arrangements. Qingfeng was Qi Lin's commander. He could directly mobilize all of Qi Lin's troops. With him here, there was no need to worry about not having enough people. Seeing Yili insist, Lu Jingxian could only give up. He thanked Yili before saying, Wang Fei, take care. Yili smiled faintly. General, take care as well. The next morning, Lu Jingxian led tens of thousands of soldiers on a mountain path and acted as though they were preparing to force their way through. The Chu army soldiers that had been lying in ambush near the mountain path started to worry. Originally, they didn't think that Lu Jingxian would choose to pass through here. After all, Lu Jingxian could be considered an old general whose name had shaken the region. How could he not understand that while this mountain path was a shortcut, it was also filled with danger? Therefore, Emo Jingli didn't send many soldiers to lie in ambush here. At most, it was just for show. However, this empty fort strategy clearly couldn't fool Lu Jingxian. Although they could also set fire to the mountain, this was the last resort. It had to be known that it was winter now. Once a fire was lit, no one knew when it would be extinguished. What do we do? The general, lying in ambush, looked at the situation in front of him and couldn't help but frown. He tilted his head and asked the person beside him. The comrade beside him frowned and said, Don't panic. This place is easy to defend and hard to attack. Lu Jingxian probably won't be able to break through in a short amount of time. Let's quickly report to Prince Li and Marquis Muyang. In the end, the Mahist army and the Chu army were still family. Unless it was absolutely necessary, no one wanted to use such a tragic method to kill the other. Moreover, facing the battle-hardened Mahist army, the Chu army had an almost natural fear. The Chu army on the mountain didn't know that when they quickly reported the Mahist army's movements, Yili had already left with another group of people. In the Chu state army, Mo Jingli looked at the secret letter in front of him and frowned. When Marquis Muyang and the others saw him like this, they quickly asked, "Emperor, is there something wrong with the Mahist army?" Mo Jingli said in a deep voice, "Lu Jingxian is preparing to force his way through the mountain path. Old Marquis Mu, is your plan really working?" Old Marquis Muyang also frowned and said in a deep voice, "If Lu Jingxian really wants to pass through there, this old official dares to guarantee that his entire army will be wiped out. But with this old official's understanding of Lu Jingxian, he doesn't seem to be such a stupid person. Why would he seek his own death?" When old Marquis Muyang first set up this place, he didn't intend to wipe out the Mahist army. He just wanted to slow down the Mahist army's marching speed. And with Lu Jingxian and Yi Li's ability, the success rate of ambushing them in this place was less than 0. It was also because of this that Lu Jingxian's actions were particularly hard to understand. Muyang asked, "Could it be a cover?" Lu Jingxian and Princess Ding might have split up their forces. Lu Jingxian only left a small group of people behind to divert our attention. Old Marquis Muyang said, "It's very likely that they split up their forces, so Prince still needs to pay attention to the situation on the road." But LV Jingxian's total military strength was less than 400,000. It was reported that LV Jingxian had placed at least 200,000 soldiers outside the mountain path. What was the use of Princess Ding bringing a few 100,000 soldiers? Besides, if it's about marching and fighting, in this old official's opinion, Princess Ding is not as good as Lu Jingxian. Although Yi Li had successively fought several famous generals, including Jinnam of Gojoseon, and pacified the northern region, old Marquis Muyang was still a veteran. But as long as old generals like old Marquis Muyang seriously analyzed the situation, they would be able to see that Yi Li was not proficient in the art of war. It was just that she often made unexpected moves. She was better at controlling and influencing the situation outside of the battlefield to push the entire war situation. But it wasn't that Yi Li's art of war was godly. Chapter 962. Lei Tingfeng, who was sitting on the guest seat, lowered his eyes. He was also thinking about Lu Jingxian's intention. However, he was also as puzzled as old Marquis Muyang. And Mo Jingli frowned. Since Lu Jingxian has already set up a formation here, however, our military strength is clearly not enough. Do we need to send more troops? Old Marquis Muyang was silent for a moment. If your majesty only wants to stop Lu Jingxian, the troops in ambush are already enough. This old subject guarantees that Lu Jingxian will definitely not be able to come over within 10 days. If your majesty wants to annihilate Lu Jingxian's troops, the less than 30,000 troops in ambush were obviously not enough to take down Lu Jingxian's 200,000 troops. Old Marquis Muyang definitely did not believe that Lu Jingxian would obediently charge in a mountain path and let them set it on fire. Mo Jingli's heart moved. Lu Jingxian was a famous general in the Mahist army. His fame and prestige were so great that only Zhang Qilan and Yuan Pei could compare to him under Mo Xiaoyao. If they could annihilate Lu Jingxian's army in one fell swoop, it would be a great thing for the Chu army that had been in low morale since the start of the expedition. After a moment of silence, Mo Jingli finally made up his mind. He said in a deep voice, "Muyang, lead 100,000 troops as reinforcements. No matter the cost, you must take down Lu Jingxian's army." Muyang quickly stood up and replied in a clear voice, "This general obeys." Lei Tingfeng wanted to say something, but when he saw Mo Jingli's determined expression, he silently shut his mouth. Old Marquis Muyang looked at Mo Jingli and said, This old subject guesses that the army led by Princess Ding will definitely take a detour. At most, they will be able to confront our army in 7 to 8 days. Your Majesty, should we send people to intercept them? Mo Jingli waved his hand and said, "No need. Let her come. I would like to see what ability Yi Li has to be able to successively defeat several famous generals of West Hill." It was actually a bit rude to say this in front of Lei Tingfeng. However, it was a fact that Yi Li had defeated Jinnum of Gojoseon and Zhu Yang's Jingwu army. Even Lei Tingfeng could not refute this fact. Lei Tingfeng didn't get angry. He just smiled faintly and said, "Emperor Chu should be more cautious." Although Imperial Father lost to Princess Ding, he has always admired Princess Ding's strategy. In this world, there are many people who have suffered losses from Princess Ding. Let's not talk about the distant ones. Let's talk about the former Rin Qining of the northern region. His country was destroyed, and his family was destroyed. Lei Tingfeng's words seemed very gentle and polite. However, in Mo Jingli's ears, it was exceptionally harsh. There was no other reason. Mo Jingli was also one of the people who had suffered losses in the hands of Yi Li. And it was just a few months ago, even more recently than Rin Qining. Mo Jingli snorted softly and said, "Thank you for your reminder, Prince Jinnum of Gojoseon." Lei Tingfeng smiled and didn't say anything. Of course, he knew why Mo Jingli was unhappy. Although not many people knew what had happened in the regent's residence in Nanjing, but after a few months, relying on some clues, it was enough for Lei Jinting to speculate some confidential information. For example, the whereabouts of Princess Ding during that time. For example, young Master Qingqian's sudden disappearance and miraculous return to Glass City. Another example was the disappearance of Mo Jingli's 2 princesses. One of them had disappeared, and the other had died of illness. Combined with the time of Mo Jingli's ascension, many problems were self-evident. Mo Jingli was willing to look down on Yi Li, but when he suffered losses, there was no reason to say that he didn't remind him. Since Mo Jingli didn't listen to his advice, Lei Tingfeng didn't care anymore. Instead, he lowered his eyes and began to calculate the troops he had brought with him. Seeing that Lei Tingfeng was tactful and no longer spoke, Mo Jingli nodded with satisfaction. After ascending to the throne as the emperor, he was even more intolerant of other people's opposing opinions than before. Moreover, this was Lei Tingfeng, who had always been indifferent to him. Although he was only a prince, he always made people feel that he was superior and looked down on him. Seeing Lei Tingfeng's respectful and obedient appearance in front of him, Mo Jingli felt exceptionally happy. Standing up, Mo Jingli waved his hand and said, "This matter is settled. Mu Yang, lead the troops to intercept Lu Jingxian. I will personally lead the troops to meet Yi Li." Seeing Mo Jingli stand up and walk to the back to rest, Old Marquis Mu Yang frowned slightly. There was a faint trace of worry between his brows. He still felt that it was completely meaningless to send Mu Yang with 100,000 troops. There was even less hope to completely eliminate Lu Jingxian in that place. However, Mo Jingli couldn't be persuaded. Although he hadn't been loyal to Mo Jingli for long, Old Marquis Mu Yang, who was good at pandering, had completely understood what kind of person Mo Jingli was. "Father, what's wrong?" Seeing his father frown, Mu Yang asked worriedly. Old Marquis Mu Yang shook his head and whispered, "You must be careful. Lu Jingxian is a famous general of the Mahist army. You must not underestimate him. If you can't do it, don't force it." "Yes, father." Looking at his father, Mu Yang still respectfully agreed despite his doubts. Old Marquis Mu Yang shook his head and sighed softly. "Forget it. Let's go back." Chapter 963. In Mu Yang's tent, Yaoji was embroidering. A figure quickly entered the tent. Yaoji was shocked and looked up vigilantly. She was relieved when she saw the person. She asked worriedly, "Why are you here?" The person was Qin Feng. Qin Feng was wearing an ordinary Chu army uniform. His face was only slightly decorated. People who were familiar with him could recognize him. However, People who were not familiar with him could not see his real face at a glance. Qin Feng looked at Yaoji, who was on the soft couch. She had shed her gorgeous and glamorous clothes and was now wearing a simple green robe with a white fox fur cloak draped over her shoulders. Compared to her previous glamorous appearance, she now looked more delicate and gentle. Qin Feng's cold eyes were slightly warm. He smiled faintly. "Don't worry. There are no outsiders outside." Yaoji nodded. She also knew that the guards near this tent were the shadow guard of the Mahist army and the Qi Lin arranged by Qin Feng. Therefore, she did not have to worry about being discovered when she talked with Mu Lai. Knowing that Qin Feng would not suddenly appear in her tent for no reason, Yaoji put down the needlework in her hand. She stood up and asked, "What's the matter?" Qin Feng said, "General Liu and Wang Fei are about to arrive." However, General Liu's troops were blocked by the Chu army 200 miles away. Just now, Mo Jingli ordered Mu Yang to lead 100,000 troops to reinforce. They planned to wipe out General Liu's army in one fell swoop. Yaoji frowned slightly. "Where is Wang Fei?" Qin Feng said, "Wang Fei should have taken another route. I have to leave the camp to meet Wang Fei. You will take care of everything in the Chu army's camp." Yaoji nodded. "Don't worry." "That's right." Yaoji took out a hairpin from her hair and put it in Qin Feng's hand. "This is the Chu army's defensive map. I saw it from Mu Yang. Be careful." Qin Feng raised his eyebrows and twisted the hairpin gently. The hairpin split into two halves, revealing a tiny paper roll in the middle. Qin Feng took out the piece of paper and looked at it. He memorized the things drawn on it and casually threw the paper into the charcoal basin next to him. Then, he returned the hairpin to its original state and gently put it on Yaoji's hairpin. He said indifferently, "The golden hairpin is too eye-catching in the army. It's very easy to be discovered. But you can give it to me later." Yaoji couldn't help blushing. Although she was over 30 years old, the snow-white fox cloak still set off her delicate face, making her look beautiful. Yaoji dodged to the side and forced herself to be calm. She said, "You should go now. Be careful." Qin Feng was not in a hurry. He just looked at Yaoji thoughtfully and asked, "Are you worried about me?" Yaoji was stunned and finally sighed. "After this matter is over, if we are both still alive, I will give you an answer." It was the first time that Qin Feng saw Yaoji so straightforward. Although there was no clear answer, it was also the first time that Yaoji gave a positive answer to her feelings. Unwilling to force her, Qin Feng whispered, "Don't worry. We will all be alive. I'll go first." After that, he turned around and left the tent. Yaoji looked at the empty tent and was lost in thought. She shouldn't be thinking about these problems at this time, but it was rare for her to be lost in thought. In fact, she had understood a long time ago that Mu Yang might be a beautiful dream in every woman's heart, but Qin Feng was more like the one who could give a woman safety and loyalty. With Qin Feng's status in the Prince Ding mansion and Princess Ding, he could have any beautiful woman he wanted. Why would he wait for her, a woman who was over 30 years old and had already given birth to a child? But compared to the former Mu Yang, Yaoji was more unwilling to ruin Qin Feng. "Yaoji." Mu Yang came in from outside and saw Yaoji standing in the middle of the tent. He couldn't help but be stunned and asked softly, "Yaoji, what's wrong?" Yaoji's eyes narrowed and a trace of determination flashed through her eyes. A faint smile appeared on her lips. She shook her head and said, "Nothing. I'm just imagining things. What's the matter?" Mu Yang said apologetically, "I'm going to lead the army to battle. If there's anything, you can send someone to find father." Although the old Marquis Mu Yang was very unhappy that his son went to battle with a woman and a child, even the emperor and commander-in-chief, Mo Jingli, didn't say anything. Naturally, the old Marquis Mu Yang wouldn't say anything. Moreover, Mu Lai was his only grandson. Even if he was unhappy, he would still take care of him. Yaoji nodded and turned to walk inside. "Do you need me to pack anything for you?" Mu Yang pulled her and said, "No need. It's not very far. I'll be back in a few days. You just need to take good care of Lai." "Yaoji, when this northern expedition is over, the emperor will definitely reward you according to your merits. At that time, I will ask the emperor to give you the rank and title of lady. In the future, I won't have to worry about you and Liar being wronged. Yaoji pushed Mu Yang's arms away slightly and said lightly, as long as Liar is safe, it's fine. I don't need any rank or title. Mu Yang smiled faintly and thought that she declined because she was embarrassed. He didn't think much of it. Even if you're only going for a few days, you should still bring some clothes. It's still very cold in the north. Yaoji turned to the side to pack. Seeing that she insisted, Mu Yang didn't refute and walked to the side with a smile to look at some documents. After a while, Mu Lai walked in and hurriedly bowed when he saw Mu Yang. Father, are they not suitable to say that father is going to war? Mu Lai asked curiously. Mu Yang picked him up and placed him on his lap. He smiled and said, That's right. Father is leaving tonight. Lai, I must listen to mother obediently. Mu Lai nodded and said, I understand. Mu Yang was very happy that his son, who didn't like being close to others, was sitting obediently on his lap. He simply carried Mu Lai away and began to look at the documents. However, he didn't notice that the 8-year-old child in his arms was reading 10 lines at a time. Every time Mu Yang turned a page, Mu Lai's eyes flashed slightly, and he carefully memorized what he saw. Old Marquis. The guards outside the door greeted in unison. Mu Yang looked up and saw the old Marquis, Mu Yang, walking in from outside. He hurriedly stood up and said, Father. The old Marquis Mu Yang naturally saw how Mu Yang carried Mu Lai and looked at the documents. He frowned slightly and said, You're going to war in a while. How can you not be prepared? Mu Yang smiled and said, Yaoji is packing. Everything is ready. Father, don't worry. The old Marquis Mu Yang nodded and said, That's good. Lu Jingxian is a famous general in the Mahist army. You must be careful. Mu Yang looked at his father in confusion. It wasn't his first time going to war. Moreover, his father had already said the same thing in the tent. Father, is there a problem? The old Marquis Mu Yang shook his head and said, Nothing. I'm just a little worried about you. What the old Marquis Mu Yang didn't say was that he always had an ominous premonition ever since he went to war. But now that his son was about to go to war, he naturally couldn't say such ominous words. Chapter 964. Mu Yang understood and laughed loudly. Now our army has the upper hand. Sun will lead the troops to intercept LV Jingxian. Even if we can't obtain a complete victory, there won't be any danger. Don't worry, father. Old Marquis Mu Yang didn't understand why he was so worried. He could only assume that he was old and worried more. He nodded. Yaoji came out with the packed luggage. She was startled when she saw old Marquis Mu Yang. She bowed slightly. Old Marquis. Old Marquis, Mu Yang nodded. Although he had some complaints about Yaoji's identity, Yaoji's behavior in the past few years had been more appropriate than Madame Sun, who was the legal wife, because she had Mu Lai as her son. Old Marquis Mu Yang couldn't give her any attitude. He only ordered, after Yang leaves, take good care of Lai in the tent. Don't wander around. Yaoji nodded obediently. Yaoji understands. Old Marquis, please don't worry. Mu Lai stood beside Mu Yang and said obediently, Grandfather, Liar will listen to mother's words. Old Marquis Mu Yang nodded in satisfaction and turned to leave. When he reached the entrance of the tent, he turned back to look at the desk Mu Yang was sitting on. Don't bring back official documents and battle reports in the future. After sending old Marquis Mu Yang off, Mu Yang said goodbye to Yaoji and Mu Lai before leaving with the luggage Yaoji prepared. Inside the tent, Mu Lai and Yaoji looked at each other for a while. Yaoji frowned. Did Marquis Mu Yang find out? Mu Lai's little face scrunched up. He thought for a while before saying, I don't think so. He probably thinks that it's not good for Mu Yang to put those things in the family's living quarters. No matter how smart old Marquis Mu Yang was, he wouldn't suspect a grandson who was only 8 or 9 years old. If old Marquis Mu Yang had discovered his identity, he wouldn't have just given him a few simple reminders. Yaoji nodded. Anyway, it's better to be careful. I know. Don't worry. All right. I just saw a few places where the Chu army is lying in ambush. I'll draw it, and you can send it to General Liu later. Okay. When Mu Yang left the Chu army's camp that night, a secret letter was sent to Lu Jingxian. After Yili bid farewell to Lu Jingxian, she led the 200,000 soldiers and horses around the narrow shortcut, still taking the main road to the south. In just 2 or 3 days, they had reached a place not far from the Chu army. They set up camp and did not advance any further. This made Mo Jingli, who had been waiting there for a long time, a little disappointed. He naturally hoped that Yili would immediately lead her troops to fight the Chu army. This way, Mo Jingli would have at least an 80% chance of defeating the Mahist army. In the Mahist army's barracks, Qin Feng, who had just come out of the Chu army's barracks, also appeared here. After not seeing each other for many months, the people by Yi Li's side were still very familiar with Qin Feng. Yin Ting didn't hold back as he walked to the front and put his hand on Qin Feng's shoulder as he smiled. Commander Qin really comes and goes like a ghost. After not seeing each other for many months, you suddenly appeared on the battlefield again. Tell me, where have you been these past few months? Qin Feng had always been by Yi Li's side. Last time, Yi Li had come back from Jiangnan, Qin Feng had disappeared. The Mahist army was not completely uncurious. However, because Wang Fei might have sent him on an important mission, they couldn't ask. Now that Qin Feng had returned, Yin Ting naturally didn't hold back and wanted to know firsthand. Zhuo Jing and Lin Han naturally knew the truth, but they were also very curious. Naturally, they were curious about Qin Feng's personal matters. Yi Li had many subordinates, but the most special one was Qin Feng, because he wasn't just the personal bodyguard that Prince Ding had personally sent to protect Wang Fei. He was also the commander of Qilin. He had probably spent more time by Princess Ding's side than Zhuo Jing and the others who had been Princess Ding's shadow guard. The ones who had the deepest relationship with him were naturally Zhuo Jing, Lin Han, and Wei Lin. Yi Li smiled faintly and glanced at Yin Ting as she said with a smile, "If you have any questions, ask them in private." Qin Feng, is there any news from the Chu army? Qin Feng nodded and said in a low voice, Wang Fei, Genom of Gojoseon's heir Lei Tungfeng appeared in the Chu army's camp the day before yesterday and hasn't left. Also, 2 days ago, Mo Jingli sent Mu Yang to lead 100,000 soldiers to intercept General Liu. Mo Jingli himself has probably already set up his troops and is waiting for Wang Fei's arrival. Yi Li's eyebrows rose slightly. Lei Tungfeng. Qin Feng nodded and said, "That's right." When Lei Tungfeng was in the Chu army's camp, Mo Jingli didn't give him any preferential treatment. Lei Tungfeng was also very well behaved and rarely raised any objections. However, it's strange that he hasn't left. Yi Li thought for a bit and asked, "What did Lei Tungfeng say?" Qin Feng said, Lei Tungfeng said that he was ordered by Genom of Gojoseon to follow Mo Jingli's orders. However, Mo Jingli definitely wouldn't allow Lei Tungfeng to come into contact with the Chu army's military power, so he kept him there as a figurehead. Since he didn't let him do anything, he naturally couldn't do anything. However, Lei Tungfeng didn't seem to mind at all. Yi Li thought for a bit and then said with furrowed brows, "Send someone to investigate whether or not Lei Tungfeng has brought any troops here." Qin Feng was slightly startled and said, "Wang Fei means that Lei Tungfeng might have secretly brought troops here. He wants to wait for the Mahist army and the Chu army to both be injured and then reap the benefits?" After all, on the surface, Lei Tungfeng hadn't brought a single soldier to the Chu army. However, this didn't mean that he couldn't place his troops in a nearby place. Yi Li shook her head and said lightly, "He might not reap the benefits, but it's possible that he's looking for an opportunity to loot a burning house." Qin Feng nodded and said with a serious expression, "Wang Fei, please don't worry. This subordinate will definitely investigate Lei Tungfeng's intentions. Wang Fei, this is the map of the Chu army that Yaoji obtained." Qin Feng presented the map in his hands. Yi Li took it and looked at it. She asked with furrowed brows, "Can it be trusted?" Qin Feng said, "This subordinate has already sent someone to check it. It's mostly trustworthy." "Mostly trustworthy?" Yi Li raised her brows with interest. Qin Feng said, "The map is real, but there are some places where it's half real and half fake. Mo Jingli doesn't trust the generals around him. This includes the Marquis Muyang's mansion. Qin Feng could understand this. After all, the Mahist army was defeated because of this and almost caused the Prince Ding mansion to be destroyed. Although it had nothing to do with Mo Jingli. Mo Jingli would learn from his mistakes. Besides, Mo Jingli was just as suspicious as Mo Jingli. However, Mo Jingli probably didn't expect that Qin Feng didn't use the map immediately. Instead, he used the time before Yili arrived to send Qi Lin to check the locations one by one. Yili looked at the map in her hand. It was only the size of a handkerchief and was filled with all kinds of symbols. The black map was the one Qin Feng obtained from Yaoji. The red words and symbols were added or crossed out by Qin Feng after he verified them. She handed the map over to Zhuo Jing. Very quickly, Zhuo Jing returned a brand new defensive map to Yili. Yili looked at it and put it down. She asked, "Do you think this is complete?" Chapter 965. Qin Feng thought for a moment and then shook his head. The Chu army has 800,000 soldiers, but I think that with Mo Jingli's persistence and hatred towards the Mahist army, it might be more than that. But from a map, there are less than 600,000 people. I think Mo Jingli might be hiding a trump card. Mo Jingli has grown quite a bit, Yili said with a faint smile. In order to deal with the Mo family army, Mo Jingli could be said to have resorted to every conceivable means. He was even able to come up with so many ideas on the defensive deployment map. This was far beyond the intelligence that Mo Jingli usually displayed. Could this be considered an extraordinary performance? If you were Mo Jingli, where would you hide the 200,000 soldiers? Yili asked. Qin Feng lowered his head and thought. Yin Ting beside him also stretched his neck to look. His lips twitched as he said, "If I were Mo Jingli, I would use the 200,000 soldiers to deal with the Wang family mansion. If I could defeat Wang Fei, even if General Liu breaks through the blockade, he would be alone and surrounded on all sides. Also, if Mo Jingli completely defeats Wang Fei, it would be extremely good news for the low morale of the Chu army. At the same time, it would be a heavy blow to the morale of the Mahist army and the Prince Ding mansion." Yili smiled and said, "Yin Ting has indeed grown quite a bit." Yin Ting wanted to retort that even an idiot could think of this. But then he thought, if he said that, wouldn't he be the same as an idiot? He could only laugh and say, "It's because Master has taught me well." Yili looked at the map in front of her. She pointed at 3 places on the map and said, "Here, here, and here. What do you think?" Lin Han said, "If it's like this, as soon as our army leaves the Cold Valley Pass, we will immediately be surrounded by the mountain. In addition to Mo Jingli's forces on the surface, we will be surrounded by at least 300,000 soldiers." But does Mo Jingli have that kind of brain? What if they thought too highly of themselves and Mo Jingli didn't think of it? In the end, it would be them scaring themselves. Qin Feng said, "Even if Mo Jingli doesn't have it, old Marquis Muyang will have it." Qin Feng had stayed in the Chu army camp for the longest time. He naturally knew a lot about old Marquis Muyang, who Mo Jingli valued the most, and who was also the best fighter in the Chu army. Character did not represent ability. Even though many generals and officials of the Chu state despised old Marquis Muyang's character, no one could deny his ability. Yin Ting shrugged and said, "If we want to surround General Liu from both sides, we have to leave the Cold Valley Pass. Even if there are 300,000 soldiers in front of us, we have to leave. We can't go back now." Maybe his master had already exterminated the Chu army and reached their destination. At that time, it would be them who were late. That wouldn't look good. Yili held her forehead and thought for a while. Then she laughed softly and said, "Yin Ting is right. If we are late, we will harm General Liu." Hearing Yili say this, Yin Ting also became anxious. "Princess, then what do we do? How do we pass this place?" Yili thought for a while and had a plan. She said in a low voice, "Yin Ting, lead the 150,000 soldiers to attack the Cold Valley Pass." Ah! Yin Ting was instantly shocked. He looked worriedly at Yili. Princess wouldn't be so anxious, right? Even though the Cold Valley Pass was not a stronghold on the border, it was the most famous ancient battlefield in the Central Plains. It was the most impregnable pass of the Central Plains. This was also the reason why LV Jinxian wanted to take a shortcut. If the two sides were at a standstill in front of the Cold Valley Pass, not to mention 150,000 people, even 500,000 people might not be able to break through the Cold Valley Pass in a few short days. Now that he knew that Imo Jingli had set up an ambush here, he probably didn't even have enough people to fill the gap between the Chu army's teeth. Yili smiled faintly and said, "I'm not telling you to attack forcefully. You just have to pretend to attack forcefully. Don't let people suspect you." Yin Ting reacted quickly and hurriedly asked, "Princess, where are you going?" Since Princess had him lead the army to feign an attack, then the trap was to hide Princess' true intentions. Yili smiled faintly and said, "The Buddha says, can't say." Yin Ting instantly became listless. He looked anxiously at Yi Li and said, "Princess, I know you're going to do something fun. Can't you bring me along?" This soldier will not hesitate to be at Princess's beck and call. Every time Princess secretly ran away, the things she did were always earth-shattering. This caused Yin Ting to feel admiration and jealousy towards Qin Feng, Zhuge Jing, and the others. Yili looked sardonically at him and said, "Right now, the only person in the army who can lead troops is you or me. Which one of us will General Yun stay behind?" Yin Ting was dejected. If Princess didn't go, then what fun would there be? If Princess went, he couldn't go. Yili raised a hand to pat Yin Ting's shoulder and said with a smile, "You are also very important here. How much we can do will depend on how long you can keep the Chu army under control. If you succeed, Ben Fei will personally go to General Liu to ask for a reward for you." Hearing this, Yin Ting immediately perked up. Yin Ting had just been accepted as a disciple. He had taken the time to read Liu Jinxian's letter after marching for a few days. He was full of admiration for this new master of his. He had been worried that he didn't have a battle record to show off in front of his master. Hearing Yi Li's words, he immediately perked up and said with a smile, "Don't worry, Princess. This soldier promises that I won't hinder Princess's plans." Yili nodded in satisfaction and said, "Very good, you can go." "Yes, this soldier will leave." Yin Ting raised his hands and left. He went out to count his own troops. Inside the tent, seeing Yin Ting charge out like the wind, everyone couldn't help but laugh. Lin Han said with a smile, "General Yun is almost 30, right? His personality is really straightforward." Yili also couldn't help but smile. In reality, Yin Ting wasn't young anymore, even though he was one of the youngest generals with some fame in the world. Even though he had fought many bitter battles in the Mahist army, the Mahist army lacked the scheming of other armies. Yin Ting's personality was cheerful, and he was Princess Ding's trusted aide. He naturally got along well with the Mahist army. Even though he was about to stand up, his personality was still as cheerful and straightforward as usual. Qin Feng looked at Yi Li and asked, "Princess, Yin Ting is holding back the Chu army and Mo Jingli. What are we going to do?" Yi Li smiled and said, "We are going to hunt." Chapter 966. At Coal Valley Pass, Mo Jingli looked down at the murderous Mahist army camp not far away. The Mahist army's black flag fluttered in the wind. Looking from afar, the entire Mahist army camp was full of vigor, like a black wave that would sweep over it any time. "Your Majesty, something's not right." Old Marquis Muyang and Lei Tingfeng stood on either side of Mo Jingli. Old Marquis Muyang frowned slightly. Mo Jingli raised his eyebrows. "Something's not right? What do you mean?" Old Marquis Muyang said in a low voice, "The Mahist army looks aggressive, but they've been bluffing for the past 2 days. They haven't done anything substantial. This doesn't match the style of the Mahist army." The reason why the Mahist army was famous in the world was because of their valiant fighting power and their fearless spirit. So they definitely wouldn't stop just because of the 1,000-year pass in front of them. The only explanation was that there was another conspiracy. Mo Jingli raised his eyebrows and said indifferently, Yili only is less than 100,000 soldiers. Even if she attacks Cold Valley Pass, could she take it down? I'm afraid she's waiting for Lu Jingxian, right? As long as Muyang stops Lu Jingxian, the people in front of us will be my prisoners sooner or later. Lei Tingfeng stared into the distance, deep in thought. After a while, he said indifferently, I haven't seen Princess Ding in the past few days. Hearing this, old Marquis Muyang's expression changed and said in a low voice, Your Majesty. Princess Ding has always been crafty. I'm afraid. Princess Ding was not only crafty, but because she had Qi Lin's help, she could appear and disappear unpredictably. Every time Princess Ding appeared, someone would be in trouble. Mo Jingli frowned. He naturally understood what old Marquis Muyang was worried about. But this time, he thought that his arrangement was flawless. No matter how smart Yi Li was, she couldn't find a loophole to take advantage of. Unfortunately, although the list that Dongfang Yu gave him solved the urgent problem of not being able to place people in Prince Ding Mansion, these people couldn't get in touch with Yi Li without arousing suspicion. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so difficult to grasp Yi Li's movements like now. Thinking, for safety's sake, Mo Jingli ordered, send someone to check if Yi Li is in the camp outside the pass. Old Marquis Muyang nodded hurriedly and turned around to leave to give orders. Reporting to Your Majesty, there's an urgent military situation. Before Marquis Muyang left, a soldier had already rushed up. Old Marquis Muyang's eyelids twitched. He had a bad premonition. The soldier who reported said, Urgent report from the front line. The 100,000 soldiers led by Marquis Muyang were ambushed by Lu Jingxian's army. They were almost wiped out. Lu Jingxian has already bypassed the ambush set by our army and is heading towards the Cold Valley Pass. How can this be? Old Marquis Muyang couldn't help but cry out. His body swayed, and he almost fell to the ground. He hurriedly asked, How is Marquis Muyang? The soldier looked at Mo Jingli behind him, and then at old Marquis Muyang. He then said, Marquis Muyang has brought less than 10,000 soldiers and is heading towards the Cold Valley Pass. Old Marquis Muyang heaved a sigh of relief when he heard that old Marquis Muyang was fine. But when he turned around and saw Mo Jingli's expression, he secretly complained at his heart. He had been worrying about this and that, and in the end, the one who was in trouble was his son. With Mo Jingli's personality, how could he not be angry? Sure enough, Mo Jingli glanced at old Marquis Muyang with a gloomy face and asked indifferently, Old Marquis Muyang, what do you have to say? Old Marquis Muyang said with a bitter face, My son failed in the battle. Please punish him, Your Majesty. On the side, Lei Tingfeng's handsome eyes narrowed. He stepped forward and said in a low voice, Emperor Chu, Marquis Muyang is still young after all. How can he defeat a veteran like Lu Jingxian who has fought for half his life? Moreover, we need people now. Mo Jingli snorted and said to old Marquis Muyang, For the sake of Jinim of Gojoseon's face, I will give him a chance to redeem himself. Old Marquis Muyang was delighted and quickly thanked. Thank you, Your Majesty, for your kindness. Even the way he looked at Lei Tingfeng was more kind and grateful. Thank you, Jinim of Gojoseon. Lei Tingfeng smiled and said, Old Marquis, you don't have to be so courteous. I am also doing this for the sake of the alliance between our two countries. In other words, the house of Marquis Muyang did not owe him a favor. Hearing this, old Marquis Muyang's expression became more kind. After all, it was not easy to owe a favor to Jinim of Gojoseon of West Hill. Lei Tingfeng looked at Mo Jingli and said, Emperor Chu, now that things have come to this, we should summon Marquis Muyang back as soon as possible and ask him about what happened. I still feel that this matter is really a little strange. Lei Tingfeng also knew a little about Mo Jingli and old Marquis Muyang's arrangement. It was almost flawless. At least Lei Tingfeng himself could not think of any flaws. Although Lei Tingfeng did not have many achievements in military affairs, he was after all taught by Lei Jinting. His knowledge and ability were first class. If even he could not see any flaws, It proved that old Marquis Muyang and Mo Jingli's arrangement was not a big problem. Even if Muyang could not win a complete victory, he would not lose too badly. But in just a few days, Muyang's army was almost wiped out. To say that there was no problem was even more unbelievable than Mo Shuyao wiping out the northern tribe's army. Hearing his words, Mo Jingli and old Marquis Muyang's expression became serious. Although old Marquis Muyang did not have much interaction with Lu Jingxian, he was still a famous general. He had some understanding of the generals in the Mahist army. Therefore, he could not believe that Lu Jingxian could break his arrangement so easily. Muyang returned very quickly. It was just that when he went out, he was in high spirits, but when he came back, he was full of scars. The original 100,000 elite soldiers were reduced to less than 6,000. This sinner, Muyang, asked for the emperor's punishment. Muyang knew very well that his bow could be said to be the first clash between the Chu army and the Mahist army, and the Chu army had suffered a crushing defeat. She was afraid that Mo Jingli would want to tear her to shreds. More importantly, his defeat almost destroyed half of the terrain advantage that the Chu army originally had. The tent was silent. The generals of the Chu army did not dare to plead for Muyang. Mo Jingli coldly looked at Muyang. There was a bloody mark on his handsome face. His shoulder was also bandaged. His left arm seemed a bit stiff. It was obvious that his injury was not light. His handsome and calm brows were filled with fatigue. Even his eyes were red. It seemed that Muyang had not been having a good time these days. "Get up." After a while, Mo Jingli said in a low voice. It was not that Mo Jingli did not want to punish Muyang. It was just that he knew that there were not many generals in the Chu army that could be used. If he punished Muyang, the old Marquis Muyang might have other thoughts. That was why he listened to Lei Tingfeng's suggestion and exempted Muyang from punishment. Lu Jingxian is a famous general of the Mahist army. I'll let this matter go. In the future, you will have to atone for your crimes. If you are negligent again, don't blame me for being ruthless. Muyang was stunned. He clearly did not expect Mo Jingli to be so lenient. The old Marquis Muyang quickly reminded him, "Why haven't you thanked the emperor for his grace?" Only then did Muyang thank Mo Jingli for his grace and stand up. "What happened this time? Tell me in detail," Mo Jingli asked in a low voice. Muyang quickly recounted the events of his defeat. In fact, not to mention others, even Muyang himself felt that his defeat was inexplicable. Muyang led 100,000 troops to reinforce. Although LV Jingxian still had the advantage in terms of numbers, the Chu army had the advantage in terms of geographical location. The Chu army had a good chance of winning. However, no one expected that on the second night after Muyang arrived, Lu Jingxian would suddenly appear behind the Chu army with 5,000 troops. In the middle of the night, the Chu army did not know how many people were attacking them. They were led by the nose by Lu Jingxian. In the end, Lu Jingxian even ignited the tung oil that was originally used to greet the Mahist army. In the end, the 100,000 troops were burned to death by the ambush that he set up. When Muyang led the remaining troops out of the sea of fire, they met Lu Jingxian's army. In the end, only a few thousand managed to escape. Chapter 967. After listening to Muyang's narration, Mo Jingli was so angry that his expression was incomparably ferocious. That is to say, my 100,000 soldiers were completely annihilated by LV Jingxian's mere 5,000 soldiers? Good. This is great. The others were silent. 5,000 against 100,000. This battle was undoubtedly the pinnacle battle of Lu Jingxian's life. However, it was hard to believe that this battle was won by Lu Jingxian's ability. There was only one question. How did Lu Jingxian know about the Chu army's encampment and the Chu army's ambush? It must be known that if he wasn't careful, he could set the nearby mountains on fire. At that time, even if Lu Jingxian won and the fire sealed the mountains, he wouldn't be able to pass through. Old Marquis Muyang said in a deep voice, "Emperor, there are spies from the Prince Ding mansion in our army. Moreover, they are extremely important and have access to our army's secrets. It could be said that the Chu army's encampment was found by Qi Lin, but the ambush they set up, even if Qi Lin wanted to find it, it would be difficult to do so without 10 days to half a month. Other than having spies from the Princeton mansion and the Chu army, old Marquis Muyang couldn't think of any other explanation. Mo Jingli rolled his eyes at old Marquis Muyang. The Princeton mansion shadow guards were almost everywhere. Even Mo Jingli couldn't guarantee that there weren't any Mahist army in his residence. What he said was nonsense. On the side, Lei Tongfeng said in a deep voice, "Old Marquis Muyang is right. I'm afraid the other party is someone very close to you. Emperor Chu, you must be careful. Also, Lu Jinxian's army is approaching. Emperor Chu, please make preparations." In the battle between Lu Jingxian and Mu Yang, the losses were almost negligible. When the two Mahist armies approached the Cold Valley Pass one after the other, the Chu army would not only lose their geographical advantage, they might even fall into a trap. Mo Jingli said solemnly, "Pass down my decree. Order the 200,000 men of the Western Army to intercept Lu Jinxian's army with all their might. Mu Yang, Zheng will give you one last chance. If you let Lu Jingxian reach the Cold Valley Pass, you should just kill yourself." Mo Jingli coldly glanced at Mu Yang. Mu Yang immediately felt a killing intent that seemed to have materialized from Mo Jingli's cold eyes. Mu Yang shuddered and hurriedly responded, "This general obeys. This general will take his leave." Mo Jingli snorted and said, "The Marquis will be in charge of investigating the spies in the Mahist army. Everyone else is dismissed. I have something to discuss with Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon." "Yes, we will take our leave," the generals replied in unison. Lei Dingfeng was not surprised. Mo Jingli thought highly of himself. If he did not suffer some losses, he would not even put a little Genom of Gojoseon in his eyes. Fortunately, Lei Dingfeng's personality had changed a lot. Otherwise, the two of them would have already fallen out. Only Mo Jingli and Lei Dingfeng were left in the tent. Mo Jingli looked at Lei Tongfeng and sighed. "I've let Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon see a joke." Lei Dingfeng said respectfully, "Emperor Chu is too serious. Victory and defeat are common in war. In fact, it is not only Emperor Chu, but also Father's side is not going well. The Mahist army has shocked the world for 200 years. It is not an undeserved reputation." This was not Lei Dingfeng comforting Mo Jingli. Mo Jingli naturally had his own sources of information. How could he not know that the battle between Mo Xiaoyao and Lei Jinting was more intense than their side? Compared to the battle at Feihong Pass, the situation here paled in comparison. This could be said to be the first real battle between Lei Jinting and Mo Xiaoyao. Naturally, it attracted the attention of the whole world. However, the battle over there did not go smoothly just because the Shilling army had the upper hand. The two armies were in a stalemate. Every battle was soul-stirring. Up until now, Lei Jinting had not been able to gain any advantage. Mo Jingli frowned and thought for a moment. Then, he said, "I can help Genom of Gojoseon." Lei Dingfeng raised his eyebrows slightly. He still looked at Mo Jingli respectfully, but not humbly. Lei Dingfeng still remembered that Mo Jingli had married Dongfangyu. Although the infinite, boundless mountain had been completely destroyed, no one could say for sure what benefits Mo Jingli had gained from Dongfangyu. Since Mo Jingli dared to say that he would help Lei Jinting, it was naturally not a joke. "Emperor Chu, please advise me," Lei Dingfeng said. Mo Jingli smiled faintly and said, "I dare not advise you, but I still have a few people in the Princeton mansion that I can use." Hearing this, Lei Dingfeng's heart skipped a beat. The most difficult thing to deal with in the Princeton mansion was not the strength of the Mahist army, nor the intelligence of Mo Xiaoyao and Su Qingchun, but its almost impenetrable defense. In this world, the news that everyone knew was what the Princeton mansion was willing to let people know. But the news that Mo Xiaoyao was not willing to let people know, they could not find out in any way. Over the years, Although people from all walks of life had been persevering in placing people in the Princeton mansion, almost none of them were really useful. Instead, many of their own elites were lost. Seeing that Lei Tingfeng seemed to be unwilling to believe, Emo Jingli was not in a hurry. He smiled faintly and said, "The crown prince of the Princeton mansion, Emo Yuchen, is now in Feihong Pass." Lei Tingfeng's eyes flashed slightly. The whereabouts of the crown prince of the Princeton mansion was naturally extremely secretive in the Mahist army. Emo Jingli seemed to have known it for a long time. It seemed that there was indeed something special. Emo Jingli smiled faintly and said, "In addition, the twins of Emo Xiaoyao and Yi Li are now being raised in the Su family." Lei Tingfeng's mind turned quickly, and he soon calmed down. He smiled faintly and said, "It seems that Emperor Chu's people are not in the Mahist army, but in Li City. In this case, it seems that they are not of much use to my father." Emo Jingli smiled and said, "Whether they are useful or not depends on how Jinim of Gojoseon uses them." "What does Emperor Chu want?" Lei Tingfeng asked. Knowing that Lei Tengfeng had compromised, Emo Jingli smiled satisfactorily and said, "How many people did the crown prince of Jinim of Gojoseon bring?" Lei Tengfeng sighed somewhat helplessly. "The infinite, boundless mountain is indeed a disaster. Fortunately, it has been destroyed long ago. I only have a mere 150,000 troops in my hands, but it is just a precaution. I definitely do not have any disloyalty to Emperor Chu. I naturally believe in the crown prince of Jinim of Gojoseon." Emo Jingli smiled and said, now that the two armies were in an alliance to fight against the Mahist army, Lei Tingfeng naturally would not have any thoughts. However, that would not necessarily be the case once the outcome was decided. Lei Tingfeng said, "I am willing to assist Marquis Muyang in intercepting Lu Jingxian." Emo Jingli nodded satisfactorily, writing a few words on a piece of paper and handing it over, saying, "This is a gift for Jinim of Gojoseon." Lei Tengfeng glanced at it, then casually tossed the piece of paper into the charcoal fire by the side, smiling mildly and saying, "Many thanks to Emperor Chu. I will take my leave." Watching Lei Tengfeng leave, Emo Jingli laughed coldly and said, "Who said that I have no men in the Mahist army?" "Emo Xiuyao. I want to see who will have the last laugh." Inside Mu Yang's tent, Yaoji was currently bandaging his wounds. Looking at the man who was riddled with wounds, Yaoji's beautiful eyes narrowed slightly, not saying anything. Beside her, Mulai was also looking at Mu Yang, his big eyes filled with worry. "Father, are you all right?" Chapter 968. Mu Yang shook his head, raised his uninjured hand, and patted Mulai's head. "Father is fine. Don't be afraid." Mulai nodded and sat obediently beside Mu Yang, watching Yaoji treat his wounds. Outside the tent, a soldier reported, "Reporting to Marquis, Senior Marquis asked you to go over after treating your wounds." Mu Yang nodded. "I know, you can go." Yaoji frowned. "Why aren't you resting after suffering such a serious injury?" Mu Yang smiled helplessly. "I'm about to leave again. Father probably wants me to go over to give some orders." "Don't worry, I didn't hurt any vital parts." "But your injuries," Mu Yang sighed. "Although this defeat was caused by the Mahist army receiving the information in advance, I still lost after all. The Emperor gave me a way out and asked me to lead the army, to resist Lu Jinxian's army, to atone for my mistake. How can I say no so easily?" Yaoji also knew the severity of the matter and nodded. "Then you must be careful." Mu Yang smiled. "Don't worry, I'll be fine." After tidying up a little, Mu Yang went to Senior Marquis Mu Yang's tent. As soon as he went out, Yaoji and Mu Lai's face sank. Mu Lai said in a deep voice, "Marquis Mu Yang will soon suspect us." There weren't many people in the army who had access to confidential information. After eliminating all possibilities, the answer would be the most unlikely one. Yaoji smiled. "You're wrong. He will soon suspect me." Mu Lai's face sank. "You're crazy. Don't think of coming out to take the blame. Don't forget, if the evidence is conclusive, do you think Mo Jingli will let me go? Moreover, With Marquis Muyang's intelligence, he may suspect my identity. Mu Lai and Mu Yang didn't look alike. Only their eyes were a little like Yaoji's. At that time, Marquis Muyang would most likely suspect his identity. Yaoji sighed. Unless it's a last resort, would I go to die? But you must be careful these days. Don't pay attention to it unless there's any important news, lest you fall into Marquis Muyang's trap. Mu Lai nodded with a solemn expression. Understand. I have a feeling that this matter will be over soon. Yaoji lowered her eyes and said in a low voice, It's good that it's over. You've worked hard these past few years. Mu Lai was only 8 or 9 years old when he followed her to the Chu capital. Not only did he have to secretly help her gather information, but he also had to remind her from time to time not to make any mistakes. If it wasn't for Mu Lai's company, she really didn't know if she would have been able to hold on. Mu Lai looked at her and said, If you can't do what Prince ordered, I'll do it. Yaoji smiled faintly and said, Don't worry so much. When the time comes, we may not be needed. Mu Lai shook his head and said, Since the prince has given the order, such a situation will definitely occur. Otherwise, do you think Marquis Muyang would be able to survive until now? Just based on the fact that he had almost killed the princess consort and the crown prince. The prince should have killed him back then. Just wait and see. I'm afraid that Prince will send news soon. Yaoji was startled. She nodded and said, Everything is fate. Moreover, I know what to do. I don't owe them anything. Why can't I do it? Other than Mu Yang being her son's father, Yaoji had gradually become indifferent to him these past few years. Back then, she thought that the feelings of the sea had dried up and the rocks had faded away. Mu Lai looked at her worriedly and nodded. He secretly made up his mind. If it really came to that time, he would make the first move to gain the upper hand, so as to avoid the knot in Yaoji's heart that would be difficult to resolve in the future. On the other side, Yili sat on the back of a horse and looked at the place not far from the foot of the mountain. She smiled faintly. Her white clothes and black hair fluttered in the slightly cold breeze. Princess Consort. Qin Feng presented a letter and said in a deep voice, General Liu has defeated Mu Yang's army of 100,000. The army is heading to the Cold Valley Pass. Shouldn't we go back? Yili frowned. She opened the letter and said, General Liu's battle was really shocking. But Qin Feng immediately let Yaoji and Mu Lai withdraw. Qin Feng was startled, but he quickly calmed down. He said quietly, Prince has ordered that Yaoji and Mu Lai have other uses. However, Immerse Xiaoyao originally didn't intend to tell Yili about this matter. But now that Princess Consort wanted Yaoji and Mu Lai to withdraw, it was contrary to Immerse Xiaoyao's order. Qin Feng could only tell the truth. Yili was startled. She quickly understood Immerse Xiaoyao's intention. She sighed softly and said to Qin Feng, You go. Try to ensure Yaoji and Mu Lai's safety. When Immerse Xiaoyao chose Yaoji as a spy in Chu Jing, Yili understood. She didn't stop him then, so she naturally wouldn't stop him now. The Marquis Mu Yang's mansion was doomed. If it could make Immerse Xiaoyao feel better, Yili didn't mind being more ruthless. Qin Feng nodded and said, Thank you, Princess Consort. The lives of spies were worthless. Many people in power didn't care about the lives of spies, because most of the spies had a great deal of information in the hands of their masters. The people in power didn't need to worry about them betraying them. If they were discovered, most of them could only die. Although the Prince Ding mansion treated their subordinates better, they couldn't take care of everyone. But Princess Ding was different. As long as it was possible, she would try her best to ensure the safety of her subordinates. Perhaps it was because of this that these people were willing to serve a woman. Princess Ding not only had the mind and strategy of a man, but also the kindness and generosity that most people in power didn't have. Yili smiled faintly and said, I'm just doing my best. I can't protect everyone. That you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.